We're on.
Doesn't surprise me.
Okay, good evening and welcome to the meeting of the North Ogden City Council. Appreciate everyone being here. We're excusing Councilman Turner, who will be joining us a little late this evening. He had another item he needed to take care of first. Invite everyone to please make sure your phones are on silent or turned off for the duration of the meeting. And we'll start our meeting. We've asked Councilman Lynn Satterthwaite to offer an invocation for the meeting and then lead us in the Pledge of Allegiance.
Our Father in heaven, we come before thee at the beginning of this council meeting to give thee thanks for all the blessings that we enjoy. We're grateful for a free land to live in. We're grateful for the Constitution that helps us retain our God-given rights. We're grateful for this city we live in and for the residents and for the opportunities that we have to discuss and to serve as a council. We pray that in our nation we might have civility in the discussions that go on in government and otherwise. Let it begin here as we discuss, that we can do so in a civil manner. We express our gratitude for citizens who have comments and suggestions. We thrive on being responsive to the needs of the citizens. Let us be careful in the decisions we make, that we might make those in the best interests of our community and our state and our nation. And we say these things in the name of Jesus Christ. Amen.
Amen.
Join with me in the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you, Councilman Satterthwaite. We'll go next on our agenda to public comments. Ladies and gentlemen, if there's anything you'd like to share with the City Council on any of the items on this agenda, now is the time to do so. We'd love to hear from you, or about any other item of city business. We invite you forward. We just ask for your name and address. And one administrative note, a reminder, we do live stream all of our meetings on YouTube. Our camera is over here just above the door, and please just take that into consideration and remember to speak clearly and also in anything you say. So with that, if there's anyone who'd like to have any public comments, we invite you forward at this time.
My name is Sydney Simmons, and my address is 674 East, 2900 North. For our world geography class, we were asked to present a economical problem that we see in our world and our country, and I chose to do world pollution, and I'd like to share that with you at this time. There are many different types of pollution, such as land, food, noise, sound, and air pollution. Around the world, pollution is killing many people, animals, and harming our world. Air and water pollution are what I will be talking on. I feel that these are the most important, and they are the ones that are harming our world the most. Air pollution. There are many different types of air pollution, such as dioxides, chemicals, gases, and it takes the form of a greenhouse. When the air is polluted, it leaves a soot-like substance in the air, and if we breathe in too much of that, it can be harmful to our breathing and respiratory systems. Although we get remarkable sunsets from this, over the course of 1 year, it has killed over 2 million people, and 38% of those 2 million are Americans, and 48% of that 38 are all Utah residents. And over 200,000 people have suffered from severe respiratory problems due to air pollution. Air pollution is killing many people around the world, and the University of Columbia says that if there are too many gases different gases or too many of one specific gas, that it can lead to the atmosphere being artificially warm, and it can potentially harm the world. Water pollution. Water pollution is caused by chemicals and foreign substances brought into the water. It is mostly caused by bacteria, mercury, and phosphorus, and nitrogen. 80% of these problems are caused by sewage. Water pollution is another big problem in our world today, between human beings, sea, and other problems. Water pollution is both dangerous to us and to the sea and to the water that we drink, eat, and use with. Around the world, over 783 million people have gone without water to eat, to use, or to shower with, and this can be harmful. We should care because water pollution is a very big problem in our world today, and we can help reduce it by recycling of our things responsibly and disposing of our trash the right way. In conclusion, pollution is very harmful to our world and to our animals and to our people, and we can overcome this by doing a few simple things like turning off our car while we're in line at a gas station or wherever, and we can dispose of our trash and waste respectfully, and we can just do a little bit more to be more considerate of our world. Thank you for your time and listening to my presentation. I hope that you will be a little more open to changing the way of your lives to help the world become a little better.
Thank you, Ms. Simmons. And is this for Weber State or what class?
North Ogden Junior High.
Oh, North Ogden Junior High? Okay, well, you are a very well-spoken young lady then, and we wish you all the best in all your future studies.
Thank you.
Thank you for coming.
Could I make a request? Was it Cindy? Sydney? Would you mind forwarding your what you've told us tonight to to me on an email address? You can go on the city website and pick that up. I'd like to see that. Thanks.
Any other comments? Well, our junior high students are on the par of college students, so great job. Perfect timing.
Hi, I'm Kira Coleman. I'm in 9th grade from North Ogden Junior High, and we've been learning about renewable energy. And I was wondering if the city has any plans to add any solar panels or other renewable energy sources to their facilities. Renewable energy is energy that can be reused and not depleted. There's this quote by David S. Findley. The sun provides more energy in 1 hour than all humanity uses. Informs us in a single year, sunlight can provide us with its own resolution to our energy problems. The only transformation required is for humanity to reduce or end consumption of stored solar as fossil fuels, and in its place use freely available fresh solar. Some examples are like windmills and solar panels, and me and my friends have recently been brought to our attention of global warming, and we are concerned of the future of the city and of our earth. Non-renewable energy sources can help eliminate in global warming, and here in the U.S. we use 63 times as much energy as third world countries use, such as India. Using too much energy can cause climates to change and this global warming problem to continue. If we use renewable energy, which is much better for the environment, I believe this global warming problem will decrease and the air we breathe will be much cleaner. Even changing our light bulbs will help. Most citizens use incandescent light bulbs when LED light bulbs could be much more healthier. I came here today to see what is being done about this overuse of non-renewable energy and what campaigns are going to be run.
Thank you, Ms. Coleman, and excellent speech as well. Like Ms. Simmons, we appreciate you coming. Our city has done two things in the last few years in this regard. The first is we've changed all our streetlights over the last 3 years in the city to LED. which is still not a renewable energy source, but they use about a quarter of the electricity that traditional streetlights use. So that's resulted in a significant reduction of power used for the street lighting of the city. The other, we installed a new trail along Pleasant View Drive. If you're aware, just west of Lee's into Pleasant View City, there's a new trail with some benches and things we put in over a year ago, and we put all solar lights on that trail, which was the first time to my knowledge that we had used a renewable energy source light. So we're trying to look for opportunities like those. The technology is not quite there on street lights to be reliably powered by solar, especially in the winter time, because there's not as much sun, or might be several days in a row that are overcast. So we can't really rely on the solar for those, but we're trying to find places like on a trail where the lighting is not as critical for safety that the solar made sense. So we're trying to do our part as a city, implementing some of those very things in the last few years, and we appreciate you sharing a great reminder about it. And it's something I think the whole city council and I all care about, as the council has supported all these things that we've done over the last few years.
All right, thank you.
Thank you both for coming. We always love to hear from our young people and know we're in great hands for the future.
And you have to stay the whole meeting, or else you don't get credit for what you just did.
Okay, we'll move on to item 2, which is discussion on an annexation petition.
Mayor,
Yes.
we have postponed number 9 for 3-4 meetings in a row. Can we move number 9 to the beginning of the schedule and make sure that we get to that?
That is fine. Is that a motion?
I'd move that we move number 9 to the top of the list.
Question, how long would these next first 6 items go that Justin's involved in? Long or short? Or who knows?
They look relatively short to me.
I would say if they're really short and Justin doesn't want to be here for an hour while we discuss number 9. So
That's fine, I'll withdraw the motion.
Thank you. We'll just move it on
Or
along.
move it after item 6,
Yes, that will work.
if you'd like.
Okay.
Let's do that. I'll
do
move
that.
that we move it to item number 7.
Second that motion.
Okay. We have a motion and a second to move item 9 up in the agenda to immediately after item 6. Is there any further discussion? All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay, thank you. So we'll reorder the agenda as discussed then. So the annexation petition and then the subdivision items will be first. So Annette Spendlove, our city recorder, can bring us up to speed on this annexation petition.
Mayor and Council, this petition has come to you before. Eric and Colette Mosier at 744 East, 1700 North. It's the approximate address. But after we started looking into it further, there were some problems with the legal description on the plat map matching the Alta title report. So we had the Mosiers take it back to get that corrected, and we've gotten that, and it's all corrected. So it's back here tonight so we can start the process on the annexation.
Any questions on this, Councilman Uri?
Yeah, I just have a question. Are they currently using our utilities and our water, those kind of things? Because I think if they're going to annex, we kind of want to do that. I don't know. I know they've been. I don't know if they may have hooked onto the sewer and some of those things when that little subdivision was put in by their place, but prior to that, they wouldn't have been.
We can look into that. I'm not sure of that right now. Justin, do you know?
Yes, they are.
They're connected?
They're connected to our water system, and I'm know with the ordinance of the 300 feet within the sewer, they should be connected to our sewer
I
system.
think they've been there a long time. Their house has.
Yeah.
May not be connected, but I think we ought to.
I know
do that at
for
every
sure the water
every
is.
chance we get, we ought
To make sure of it?
Yes.
Okay.
Okay.
So let's just confirm all utilities are or will be connected.
Okay.
Okay, any other discussion on this item? then tonight, and that you're looking for an acceptance of this petition, correct?
Yes,
To
to
begin the
start the
process?
process,
Okay, and then
yes.
it'll come back later for a final decision.
So, Mr. Mayor, I make a motion that we accept the Mosier petition for processing towards annexation.
I'll second it.
We have a motion and a second to accept this annexation petition. Is there any further discussion? All in favor? Oh, actually, we need to voice vote on this one. Councilwoman Stoker,
Yes.
Councilman Satterthwaite,
Yes.
Councilman Uri,
Yes.
and Councilman Swanson.
Yes.
Okay, thank you. Then that motion passes 4-0. We'll move to item 3. We've got a number of subdivision acceptances to put before you, council members. As you know, it's been a very busy time this year for home construction, and so we've got a lot of subdivisions in the works. So our Public Works Inspector, Justin Schinzel, welcome, and let's talk about Fernwood first.
Okay, this one is Fernwood 5. It's the small subdivision that attaches up to
Backyards are on.
backyard to Fruitland Drive. Yep.
Okay.
So they've done a little extra on widening of Fruitland and put up curb and gutter on Fruitland. They've done all the improvements. I've gone through, done my inspection, and it's ready to go under the 1-year warranty period, which still gives us the protection that if anything in the infrastructure is faulty, it is replaced at the developer's cost, not any cost to the city.
So, Justin, let me ask a question.
Okay.
When we say that's under a 1-year warranty period, so there's only like one of those houses that's even being started in that subdivision,
Yes.
right? So does that mean that at the end of the year, any of that infrastructure, the warranty's off of it, and we may not know if it's going to be work all right until a house builds there and tries to hook onto it, or what?
No, due to, the sewers and all that being cameraed, I've gone through all the videos
Okay.
and looked at that. All the water, we have to go and test all the water in the
Water lines.
water meter boxes that they're operating correctly. Similar to another subdivision, I found a small water infiltration into the sewer system. On further investigation, they had cracked a piece of pipe that was going into the lot. And so I made them dig it up and replace that piece of pipe down on Ward Farms Phase 2.
So is there any,
So-
so at the end of 1 year, if a house gets built there and then we find something wrong, there's no warranty to us? There is a warranty to the guy that's building the house, or what?
So as far as for us, like their sewer lateral always falls on the homeowner. Anything behind the meter box falls on the homeowner. So everything that's been looked at and gone over, I've gone over with a fine-tooth comb before the asphalt ever went down. I've got pressure tests on all the water mains and services. I've got videos on the sewer, the storm drain, the land drain. Really the only issue is, and we've rectified this with running tracer wire with the sewer line and making sure it was green pipe, that there might be a chance that a land drain and a sewer get switched. But we've gone above and beyond to try to make sure that will not ever happen again.
So when the person builds a house and that lateral comes out and it's hooked into our sewer line, that's the builder and the owner's
Yes.
responsibility to make
Yes.
sure that that's hooked in correctly?
Yes.
And you're there to inspect that?
At that point, that falls under our building inspector.
Okay.
But up until from where it hooks onto the main and 15 feet into the property, I am there to inspect that and make sure it's up to code and put in the right way. Plenty of gravel around it so that it doesn't get big rocks on it.
New filter put back in it
Yep.
instead of boulders
Yep.
crushing it. They're crushing it.
Exactly.
Okay.
Any other questions on Fernwood subdivision? This is for a conditional acceptance. It will come back in 1 year, at which time Justin will perform another inspection and then come before you, council members, to ask for a final acceptance of this subdivision.
I'd move that we accept it.
I second.
We have a motion and a second to grant conditional acceptance to Fernwood subdivision. Is there any further discussion? Start the voting with Councilman Satterthwaite,
Yes.
Councilman Uri,
Yes.
Councilman Swanson,
Yes.
Councilwoman Stoker.
Yes.
Okay, thank you. Then that passes 4-0, and we'll see that one back in a year. So let's go to Woodfield Farms Phase 1.
So this subdivision is on 1700, just off of 525 East. This one's taken a little while longer due to out on 1700, they had to move a power pole, and it took Rocky Mountain Power quite a significant amount of time to get that moved. But it is moved now. It's no longer a hazard or a worry, and put in the park strip, and they're ready to move forward to get this under a conditional acceptance also.
That's hooked into that retention basin, right?
Yes. Retention for now, hopefully with another development closer to Washington, it will be a detention basin.
How's that retention basin working?
It works fine. It's working good. Last winter we had a lot of water, so the developer had to come out and run a pump over into the storm drain to actually get it to drain. But we just had so much water last year. But it did its job the way it was supposed to.
So is there a reason that we want to change that if it's working good?
Yes.
Okay.
We don't want quote unquote retention basins. They turn into a health issue, a mosquito populace. We want to have the control that if we want to detain water, there's still a control structure on that. So if we want to detain water, we can detain it up to making sure it's full. But we also want to be able to release it out at the manner that we need to get it released out.
One other reason, Councilman, is the retention to meet our standards has to be larger to be able to retain it because it needs to soak into the ground over time. So once this becomes a detention basin, we'll actually have some additional capacity for larger storms, that would not otherwise have been constructed. So it'll be nice when it transitions to a detention basin because we'll actually have some free capacity in there that
Yes.
When will that
was built.
That won't do a detention basin until we get that pipe under the.
Yes.
Or we got the pipe under Washington.
We
but
have
gotta
it
get
under
that-
Washington, but it still has a section that needs to be connected from outside of the townhomes to Washington.
And then that needs to be connected on the Harrisville side.
In
On the
Harrisville, and
Harrisville
actually
side,
there's a
yes.
subdivision that's got initial approval there,
Yes.
which would do exactly that. So we're working with Harrisville to just get the coordination between the cities, but it's looking very promising
Yes.
for either late this year or next year that would take place.
That's on the west side.
The west side, right, and it's the very, very northern end of Harrisville City.
On the retention basin, with all the water we had, was there any leakage into adjoining property owners' properties?
Not through the retention basin. The way the lay of the land is down there and the street was built up, the lots and the retention basin kind of made a pool. And so last spring, we made the developer, there's an irrigation ditch that runs back behind the retention basin. And somehow the end of the pipe kind of got blocked off when they were either digging the retention basin or when they were doing something else, they came in, they cleaned it out, they dug it out, they've actually extended that pipe out about 20 feet, and it's solved the issue that some water was getting into Ogden City property.
But is it now going into that irrigation ditch? I thought that was against that we couldn't dump water into the
It's not
irrigation
our
ditch.
water, it's the water that was on the field that's actually maintained for the irrigation ditch. So it's coming from the undeveloped farm field above. Does that make sense? So
But it is, I mean, it's part of Woodfield's property.
yes, and they just came in a week and a half ago and have had a pre-construction meeting for phase 2, and we'll be starting phase 2, and that will actually completely
So any water
dismantle
that's
that.
dumping into the irrigation ditch now is coming off the undeveloped property that
Yes.
Woodfield Farms owned, and I'm assuming that that's always gone into that
It has always gone into
irrigation
that.
ditch.
Yes.
But we don't have any water coming from the detention basin that's going
No,
into the irrigation.
no, from the detention basin is completely encased and with fabric and rock lined. It's really been a nice detention basin and works its functionality.
Okay.
So one more quick question, Justin.
Okay.
How have they had to replace the curb and gutter anywhere in this subdivision or sidewalk?
In this one, no. Well, the sidewalk in certain areas where when they've dug the homes, they ran over it and broke it up. But the protection there is also with the fact to get a certificate of occupancy and a final building inspection. Our building inspectors don't allow any cracked concrete on their section of property. So we kind of feel like we really watch that and make sure that's
Does the
taken
builder
care of.
have to replace that, or does the homeowner have to replace it?
Both. It depends. If the homeowner fought it enough, I'm sure the builder would replace it. Where this subdivision is all one builder, as far as rainy homes, I'm sure they take care of it.
Other questions or discussion on Woodfield Farms, also a conditional acceptance?
I make a motion or move that we accept the conditional acceptance of Canyon View Vista subdivision.
Woodfield Farms.
Oh, am I on the wrong one?
Yeah, you went ahead of yourself.
Before.
I'm hurrying it along. Okay, Woodfield Farms subdivision, accept the conditional approval.
Second.
Okay, we have a motion and a second for a conditional acceptance of Woodfield Farms Phase 1. Is there any further discussion? Start voting with Councilman Uri,
Yes.
Councilman Swanson,
Yes.
Councilwoman Stoker,
Yes.
Councilman Satterthwaite.
Yes.
Okay, thank you. That motion passes 4-0 then. And now we're on to Canyon Vista subdivision as well.
This subdivision is on 2750, just 1225 east.
By you.
Yes, right, just up the road.
Just
from-
east of Lynn's place?
Yeah. This one has taken a little while longer also. Last year was probably 90% completed when I took over the position of Public Works Inspector. But out on 2750, they had a bit of an issue with the engineering. They placed the curb and gutter 8 inches too high. So over the last year and a half, I've been working with the developer, the engineer, our city engineer, Matt Harvickson, on coming up with a solution to fix the road so there's not a quote-unquote ditch where water can stay and create an ice buildup right onto 2750 going into 1225. The solution on that was they came in, they put a 1-inch overlay just to make it level. Then came in with roto mill machines, milled down the whole 2 inches against the curb and gutter, 8 feet wide out, and then cross cut it up into 2700. With doing that, they came back and re-asphalted all that, moved the crown of the road out, and it took away the ditch that was there. Now it all free flows, comes down 2750, the water, and then runs into their development and down into the storm drain system and into that detention basin at the corner of the subdivision. So it took a little bit of thinking on Matt Hardvickson's thought on how to do it, and I was there to make sure that it was done to the way he asked, and E.K. Bailey did make sure that they got that done to the way that we asked. So we wished it would have never happened in the first place, but I'm glad that we did get it caught and get it fixed to not create a safety issue right there on 2750.
How do you test that? Do you open a fire hydrant to have the
Yeah,
water
we
run down
actually
it?
had a water truck that E.K. Bailey had, and they let the water down. And the first time they did it, sure enough, it came down, and instead of hitting the curb and running down, it followed that ditch line, and a lot of it settled right there in the entranceway, and then the rest ran down onto an abutting neighbor's property. And we didn't like that either. So with the way they have it now, it all filters into their subdivision.
Okay, questions or comments on Canyon Vista subdivision, which is also a conditional acceptance?
So how's the curb and gutter and sidewalk here?
Good.
So I make a motion to give a conditional acceptance of the Canyon Vista subdivision.
Second.
Okay, we have a motion and a second to grant conditional acceptance of Canyon Vista subdivision. Is there any further discussion? Start the voting with Councilman Swanson,
Yes.
Councilwoman Stoker,
Yes.
Councilman Satterthwaite,
Yes.
and Councilman Uri.
Yes.
Okay, thank you. That motion passes with 4-0 as well. And we'll move on to our last subdivision of the night, Hall Tree subdivision, Phase 15.
Hall Tree 15 is coming to the council for the second time for a final approval. This year, it received its seal coat over the entire road. There was one little spot earlier this spring that had a sinkhole. We had made them dig it up and fix it and repair it the right way. They filled the hole with flowable fill and then topped it off with the asphalt, with the new asphalt. And now it has a nice seal coat over it. All but 1 or 2 lots are built out completely. The homes are all on it. Everything's working properly. Has a street light, the street signs, everything's ready to go on this subdivision.
Council members, question for Justin on Hall Tree subdivision Phase 15, which this is proposed for final acceptance.
How many phases do they have up there, Justin? You know,
I think after it's all said and done, it's in the 20s.
really?
They have quite a few.
So tell us what additional or what testing inspections you do for the final.
So for the
That's
final,
a short answer, very
yes.
short.
So the final, because of all the testing and everything that's done before the asphalt goes down, the final is more of a walkthrough. walk all the curb gutter sidewalk, make sure there is no cracks or breaks, go to all the water meter valves, make sure I can get a water valve key on them so that all of a sudden if we have a leak 30 years, 20 years down the road, the water department doesn't come and say, we can't get on this valve because the valve box is tilted. I go through all the manholes, make sure that they've been clean, grouted. There's no debris in any of the catch basins for the storm drain. The final's really more of just a visual, make sure everything's clean, up to working properly, because most of it's been in for, by completion, 2.5 years. By the time final acceptance is granted, so we know that the infrastructure as far as the piping and the water, the sewer is all working correctly, but it's just the cosmetic and making sure that everything that we need to see is working and functioning properly.
So, Mr. Mayor, I'll make a motion that we give final acceptance of the Halltree subdivision phase 15.
Second.
Okay, we have a motion and a second to grant final acceptance of Halltree subdivision phase 15. Is there any further discussion? We'll start the voting with Councilwoman Stoker,
Yes.
Councilman Satterthwaite,
Yes.
Councilman Uri,
Yes.
and Councilman Swanson.
Yes.
Okay, thank you. Then that also passes 4-0. Justin, we thank you. You're doing an awesome job. I'm very pleased with the work Justin is doing for the city. Your job, as we've talked at length, is not to help developers. It's to ensure the infrastructure of the city is built to standard and that we don't take any problems that will become a problem for the taxpayers to fix instead of the developer down the road. And I'm thrilled with the thoroughness of the job that you're doing. And just want to mention that while you're here and for the benefit of the whole council, we really have had excellent work from Justin, which is a far cry from the first water leak I went on with him when he was a brand new employee in his cowboy boots and everything. I'm like, who is this guy? Is he going to work out? And he's been absolutely phenomenal for us. So thank you.
Hey, that's, you don't have to take that from him. There's nothing wrong with cowboy boots. You can still wear those.
Well, I do, but I appreciate you guys and all you guys have done for the Public Works Department. We as a department and really enjoy what we're doing, so thank you.
And let me just echo what the mayor said. These aren't casual acceptances. I've been out with Justin a couple of times, and this is a good, thorough job. And he handles the people in a nice way, too, but they know he doesn't move. We're going to have a good infrastructure.
Thank you.
Thank you, Justin.
Justin.
Okay, we'll go now to item 9. And Councilman Turner, we're skipping a couple. We're not quite that far ahead in the agenda.
I was hoping you were there.
So we wanted to make sure item 9, which has been and gone a couple times, our city attorney and administrator, John Call, has been working with our police chief about making sure we're set for the next winter and likelihood of a lot of snow and vehicles on the street. So he's been doing a lot of great work on this item. So John, why don't you bring us up to speed on where you are and what we need to do?
So, council, our code currently says that we are allowed to impound vehicles and that we are allowed to charge a fee, but the council is the one who sets the fee. And the reason this is coming up is last winter we actually had a few vehicles hit by our plow trucks that were illegally parked in the roadway during a snowstorm. Those wing trucks, it's harder to gauge how close you are to them. And so we had a few that got nicked or, bumped by the wing of the plows. It wasn't typically, or it wasn't a vehicle connection. It was a wing, if that makes sense. So it's not that our drivers are being unsafe. It's just that, sometimes I think on one of them they didn't even know it was there. It was kind of hiding behind some snow. So what we'd like to do is or what we're recommending is that we be strict and that after it's been tagged, if it isn't moved, that the police are allowed to call someone in to tow it away. And what our ordinance allows us to do that, it just doesn't specify a fee in our fee schedule for what we can charge. So I just want to bring this to the council, let you talk about it, and decide if you're okay with us moving in that direction, being that this is a policy decision, and there might be some fallout from people who get their vehicles towed, although it might be less fallout than the people who get their vehicles hit. And so we're hoping this will alleviate some of the problems and especially some of the problem areas of the town that we see this in, particularly along our major corridors, where we need to have vehicles off the road. What the police chief has recommended is that we go with, and we just would use the same contract that Weber County and Ogden City use, where they just use a rotating, they call dispatch, and dispatch sends out a tow truck. So it wouldn't be a new contract with the city. It would be the same thing that the other government entities close by are using, and allow us to pass the money around to those vendors who've already been thoroughly vetted and qualified by our neighboring agencies. But that will require a change to the consolidated fee schedule. And I just wanted to see if the council was okay with that, and then we'd bring back a modification to the consolidated fee schedule that outlines those fees. And it might include some language changes here that make it clear that it's not just they have to pay the city the fee, it's that they would pay the actual towing company, so that it's clear that it's not like the city's, that they're giving the city the money and we're paying the tow company, that it's just going to go straight to the people who've towed the vehicle and helped it in their yard.
So this fee that we set then is what the residents or whoever gets towed would be paying the towing company?
It would be, yeah.
On top of their towing
So
charges, or this would be the fee?
it would be the fee. So the idea would be that the fee to the city would be zero, but the fee to it'd basically be set up so they're covering the fee to the tow company.
Okay.
Although they might have received a ticket as well that they would pay to the city for the winter parking ticket. But the towing fees, we wouldn't add a surcharge on top of it. It would just be they would pay what it costs.
What is the fee in Ogden and Weber County?
Typically, for a tow truck to come and pick you up, it's $125 minimum, and then there's a per day charge that's usually $90 to $125, depending on how long it stays in the yard. If you pick it up within the first 24 hours, usually, I have had a car towed, so this is why I probably know more than I should. It popped out of gear and ended up in the wrong spot at the UTA station. So typically if you pick it up within the first 16, 24 hours, they don't charge you the extra fee. But once you let it sit for a couple of days, once it hits to that 25th, 26th hour, then they'll ding you, as well as they'll charge you if it's an after hour fee. So if it's not during regular business hours, usually they add another, it's actually pretty steep. I think it's like $80 if you pick it up outside of business hours. So, it's not cheap, and we're hoping that we're as we do every year, we're sending out lots of flyers. We'll send out warnings. Once it hits November 15th, we plaster every car on the road with warnings, even if there's no snow, to just get them in the mode that, hey, don't forget it's winter time and you can't park out here. But then we don't write tickets, or we wouldn't tow vehicles unless there's an actual snowstorm, and the police would be the ones who make the decision on whether it needs to be pulled or not. So,
Will we be giving our police the leeway to make a judgment call on how far ahead of the storm they start towing vehicles? I mean, we don't want to wait till the storm's up on top of us to start towing vehicles, because then everybody and their dog is going to be towing vehicles, and we won't get a tow truck up here to tow anything. I mean,
They'll
if
be
there's a
towing
major
wrecks.
What's that?
They'll be towing wrecks
That's
at
right.
that point.
It seems to make sense that we would give the police department the ability to monitor the weather and look at it and say, there's a big one coming, forecasted. You can never be 100% sure, but it's forecasted. So 12 hours ahead of when it's supposed to be here, we start, 12 hours is a random number, but.
So the hard part about that is the way our ordinance says is you can't park overnight from, I think it's 11 p.m. to 6 a.m. and you can't park on the street during a storm event. And so if people are parked on the street before the snow comes, then we can't tow them. It would only be after the snow accumulates and we roll our trucks out that we would probably be enforcing this. But I know the police have done a great job of, if there's a car in the road, a lot of times they'll pull over and go knock on the door and say, hey, you gotta, is that your car? Yes, you gotta move it. Just, so the first gut reaction is not to ticket or tow. They typically try and get it moved.
So tell me that again, our ordinance is from what time to what time?
I believe it's 11 p.m. to 6 a.m. for on-street parking at night
Or
during a storm event
in the day?
in the day. So if
I
it's,
thought that was before, 24 hours before or after, wasn't it?
so
The
there,
storm event?
I think it is 24 hours after. I don't remember the before, but
Okay.
maybe I'm,
But
That's
but
how I
during the-
remember it. I could be off too.
During the 11 to 6, they could be ticketed.
yeah.
Okay.
And what I'll do is I'll bring back the actual code language when we discuss this so that it's really clear these are the parameters. And I think that the police would also respond to council direction that says we don't want a vehicle towed unless it meets this thing. But that might be if it's 24 hours before a main event and our code says 24 hours, then we start ticketing and towing ahead of time.
And I should say too, our intent is not to make money. We're not adding a surcharge onto the tow. This is not a moneymaker for the city. It's to get the vehicles off the road, both for the fact that anytime a vehicle's on the road, it has to get plowed around and then that patch is left and becomes icy for potentially days. And also, we have had an increase in the number of vehicles on the road that are getting hit by the plows. And we don't feel that should be paid for by the city because those cars shouldn't be on the road. And it's harder than it sounds driving on a snowy and icy road to always get around these vehicles out in the street and back, as close as you can to get as little area, leaving as little area unplowed as possible. So we've had a number of claims last year, and correct me if I'm wrong, Annette, who runs our insurance, they were all denied, right? Our insurance company has denied these claims of people who've been getting hit, which, is just one of those potential political problems that, hey, my car was hit by North Ogden City, they won't pay for it. Well, we're saying you were parked on the street when you shouldn't have been, so we don't think this city should be liable. So it just, getting people the message that they need to get off the street could hopefully help eliminate some potential liability, financial or political, for the city, and avoid less areas that aren't getting plowed when those cars are left out on the streets.
And then we also looked at, hey, should we tow the vehicles to our own yard and maybe possibly avoid impound fees? And the response was, it's a headache, the man hours and the liability for stuff disappearing out of cars is not worth the cost savings, because there wouldn't be a cost savings to the residents because the fees would have to go up to cover that stuff. So.
Do we have anything in that ordinance, John, that, we want, and we really wouldn't want to go on a witch hunt to write all the tickets, but there ought to be some, and there ought to be some teeth in there that if somebody has received so many tickets during the season, the next one ought to be a tow, not a ticket.
So our police officers track every single warning and ticket that goes out in their system. And so even if it's a different shift, an officer can see that, you know what, this vehicle or this house has been told to keep their stuff off the road. And so they'll, typically in the first couple of months, that takes it from the level of a warning to a ticket. But I think that you're right, it might be good to, after 2 tickets and it's towed or something like that. And we can, the police will respond to whatever direction that the council wants to give them through the mayor.
I was thinking about 3 strikes, you're out, you get three tickets and then you're towed on it. The next one, you don't get a ticket, you're just towed.
Along those lines, I think some of the concern is, though, that's at least 3 plowings that have gone by. Yeah. Vehicles in the street and that have an opportunity to be hit. and they know they shouldn't be there, and
Well, but it may not be even a stormy time. It might just be they're parked
If it
on
was
the
a
street
warning,
with
yeah.
the-
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. I was looking at the code, and I've got it up here, and it is 24 hours following the cessation of snow after a snowstorm. Nothing about before the storm.
So
Councilman Satterwhite, then Councilman Turner.
we want to be that prescriptive to say, okay, it's 2 tickets and then tow, or, I remember this coming before the council, the parking issue last year. My memory's not great there, but I had people calling me concerned because some people were given a warning and others, first time, they were given tickets. And so it was inconsistent, and you know, maybe we need to give the police that latitude, but I'd like to be lenient where we can. I understand the problem of plows hitting cars, and people ought to understand that too. But are you recommending that we say so many tickets and then, or that we give them discretion? What do you?
I lean more towards officer discretion, because I feel like they're going to see things on the ground that make a difference. A good example, for example, is the individual. There was a family who moved into our city, and within a month, their father was involved in an accident down here at the main, and his work truck was on the street for 2 or 3 weeks until the company could get someone out to do it, to pull it, to move it. And they didn't issue any tickets, just because there was a circumstance there that the officers and the public works guys were aware of, and they went around it. And, that patch did end up being a nasty patch all winter long where that vehicle had been parked. But, I think giving them the discretion that's their job. They're trained to kind of to deal through that. And I hate to take that trust away from them.
So my comment was exactly what John was saying about the people they just live down the street from me and they're in that accident. But I think we don't want to. Couple things on the. I don't think we do 2 strikes, you're out or anything. My thoughts are, if you're parked and the ordinance says you're not supposed to park here at these times, we have the option to tow them without any warning or anything. But I think we ought to give them that option. But I also think our police department does a fantastic job and Public Works does a fantastic job of finding why the vehicle's there. It could be an elderly person that, it could be 100 different reasons why that car's parked there, and they've done a great job. I also think we ought to think about the fees in the sense, I don't know if we should establish a fee. The reason is because you mentioned it was only $125. When I was doing a job downtown Ogden, a couple of the guys that worked for us got their trucks towed. It was $259 to get it out the first, and then it was like $100 a day. So we don't know what the impound is going to be. So I don't know if we set it at $150 and then they go to get it out and it's $250. I'd say we just have something to say to pay the impound fee of what is designated by but then I don't know if we want to give the latitude to the towing companies, because some of them, honestly, I've had them on jobs before and had contracts with them, and they're very aggressive, and it's hard to get out of contracts. So I like the idea of being able to have somebody we can just call.
And I think that the Weber County one, and I'll bring this information as well. I believe that they set the fee that you get this much to pick it up and tow it, and then this much to keep it in the yard, and it's just on a rotation. And then anyone who wants to get on the list applies, and they get verified and approved to be on the list. And then when it's their turn for the call, they'll come and pick a car up.
But they did have a big controversy last year over some towing companies that were really charging excessive fees. And so I think we need to be careful about that. Mm-hmm. So Ogden City, you talked about the UTA parking lot. And when I first started driving the train, I parked in a parking spot down there, got ticketed one day. They said, "Didn't you see the sign?" Well, the sign's 10 feet in the air. You pull in with your car, you don't look up 10 feet to see if it says no parking. But,
I can see how if their impound lot is downtown, the further north we are, the more they want to charge for the. Mm-hmm. So I'm all for getting a fix to let's get them on a contract to do a fair a fair fee and then freeze it contractually.
Okay.
And we'll follow up on those details with Weber County to make sure if it is indeed set, because my understanding is the same as what John mentioned, that the county basically established a contract price, so we just need to confirm we can get the same with our distance and everything like that. Councilman Swanson?
And you said that dispatch is the one that sends out the towing company. This isn't the predatory towing that was happening in Ogden where a towing company is told, nobody's supposed to park in our lot at night, you tow anybody that shows up, and boy, they were towing everybody.
Right. No, yeah,
Yeah.
the idea is that an officer calls into dispatch and say, hey, I need a tow truck to come out and pick up this vehicle
Okay.
on this street, this license plate, and then they'll come pick it up.
Okay.
So,
So, I was gonna just point out, in the code right now, 7-3-6, the fourth line, it says, before such vehicle is released from, do we mean impound?
yeah, it meant to say impound. So we'll clean that up as well. Although in this one, we won't, because they're not going to pay the fee to the city. So we're going to tweak the language and say that that the owner of the vehicle is responsible to pay the appropriate fee to get it out of impound.
So do you wanna bring that language back?
Mm-hmm.
Is that?
Yeah, this is just a discussion item because I wanted to get the council's feel before we started tweaking the language at all.
And we'll probably have Chief come back as well next time to talk a little bit more about his recommendations on the towing. And then you can kind of give, some feedback to him as well.
John, what are the possible ramifications if we tow somebody that, I don't know, maybe they never go and get their car, or they tow it and they claim that we illegally towed it and had pictures that said it wasn't snowing and it was just parked there, I mean, what are some of the ramifications that could happen? Or are there?
So
Unintended consequences, I guess.
So a vehicle can't be towed until the police are notified and dispatch is told that a vehicle's being towed. Does that make sense? So for example, when my vehicle was towed, someone called it in to the wrong dispatch. And so when I got off the train and my car was missing, I called the police and they said it hadn't been towed, and so I reported it as stolen. Mm-hmm. And so there's a very formal process they have to go through, and there probably would need to be some training to our officers on this is all the paperwork you need to do. My guess is most of them have gone through it in one form or another, but it would be good to update them. But the towing companies actually know the rules better than anybody else, because if they illegally tow someone, then they don't get to charge a fee, and sometimes they're fined. And so they would make sure they're following all the rules. As far as causing damage to a vehicle or leaving it in a yard too long, those are governed by state statute. There's a state statute that I think says if a vehicle's been in there 15 days, and I'm probably wrong on that number, but it's considered abandoned, and then they can auction it off. So they'll send it to an auctioning yard. And damage to vehicles is, all their vehicles are now, most of them do a four-wheel dolly, so that even if they lift you up, they'll put wheels under the back tires because they're so cautious on causing damage that they just go over above and beyond. But most trucks now use just the flatbed. They'll drag it up on the flatbed and drive it away, so all four wheels are off the ground. So it's more on the towing company than it is on the city, because they're the ones who accept responsibility when they take possession of the vehicle.
So let me just understand here and get a feeling for what everybody's thinking. So if we have someone that was, even if there was not a snowstorm, our ordinance says they can't park from 11 till 6. So if we had somebody that habitually was parking on that, even when there wasn't a snowstorm, and our officers had noticed that they were habitually there, and we ticketed them 1 or 2 or 3 or 4 or 5 times, would we consider towing them, or are we only going to consider towing them when it's a snowstorm?
That's going to be a question for the council. I know that was.
I would say we should at that point,
So I know that.
We know they're not going to obey the ordinance if they've been ticketed and paid the ticket 4 or 5 times, and
Well, and also to, you know, as most of you know, there's an ordinance that says you can't park on your yard, you know, and things like that. But there are several residents who clear off a little parking spot just to the side of their driveway, and because they don't have enough parking. And with code enforcement, we've told them it's better for them to have it off the road and everything clean than to have it on the road. And so we've granted a little grace in that way, because it's safer to have them off the road. But I know that in talking with the police and the public works, they were focusing mostly on stores or cars on the road during the snowstorm. But if the council would like to direct, hey, if they've gotten, you know, just too many tickets and they're there every night, then it might be time to let them know that they can't do that.
I don't know what that number is, but I think there probably is a number that if it's a habitual offender, that there ought to be a towing at that point.
Most homes haven't got, most people, I think the most anyone got last year was 2 or maybe 3 tickets, and they all came in and paid. And so it wasn't most people don't want to, it's only a $25 fee, but they don't want to pay anything if they can, so.
I think that's where the officer discretion comes in as well. The officers, like you said, they often have gone to the door initially and said, you know, you got to get your vehicle off the street, and I think probably have a pretty good sense of the demeanor of the individual and the cooperativeness. And I think we let the officers, it may be 1 ticket with one individual, it might be 3 with somebody else.
Yeah,
Just depending on the demeanor of the individual and you know, what the officer senses. I'd rather they have that leeway.
Didn't we have a problem with somebody with towing a trailer that the officer went?
Track my house off.
We had some concerns. So this would also relate to trailers during the rest of the year.
Right.
And we did have an issue where we were on the verge of towing a trailer, and so that's what kind of brought this to a head. Is the police department said, well, technically we can take it, but we don't get to charge any money for it. And so this is kind of a cleanup item that was brought to our attention by one of the detectives over there, or the lieutenants, who said, hey, we need to get this taken care of. And so it would apply to trailers that are parked for longer than 48 hours on the roadways during any time of the year. But there again, usually the officers make 2 or 3 contacts to remind them to move it before they actually start. They would actually want to hook one up and tow it off.
Well, while we're at that, and John, I'd request you look into something that just drives me nuts, driving on Washington Boulevard. I haven't seen it in our city. You get down to about Harrisville, and guys leave their trailers there, unhook the tractor.
I just saw one at the south end of our city a few days ago. I was thinking the same
And it
thing.
happens on 2700 just west of Lee's regularly.
They'll leave them there for all winter long and all summer long. They just park them there because they don't have any place to park them by their house. And we ought to put something, if we don't have something in our ordinance about that, we ought to have that.
So the way our ordinance says is that you get essentially a 48, if it's attached to a vehicle and it's not blocking anything, then it's typically allowed to stay for a longer period of time. If it's unattached, it can be 48 hours, and then we would have the authority to take it. So if there was a vehicle on 2700 that's full semi, then in theory we could have it moved if it's been there for longer than 48 hours.
I think that is different though than a travel trailer or somebody who's got, their toy hauler or something. When you got a semi, those parking areas are not for the parking of a semi. It's not an 83-foot parking space because you don't have anywhere else, or it's inconvenient for you to park somewhere else. It's a hazard for anybody.
I agree.
The truck itself might be safe, but somebody gets sideswiped or something, and you've got a vehicle that then plows into the back of one of those things. It's just,
I think we ought to have no overnight parking of semi-trailers on those, on Washington Boulevard at least, and 2700.
Councilwoman Stoker.
I know Pleasant View had some problems with that. It's down there by Alliance Bank. Mm-hmm. That road that's long, and there's just businesses along there. They finally came up with something that said no semis can park on this at all.
Yeah.
because they had the same problem. So I don't know if there's some language that they have or figured out how to do it. I don't know. But yeah, you can't park there at all.
And that's an expensive tow.
Yeah. When they have
No,
to,
seriously.
yeah, when they fire up a full-size tractor to come pick something up, it's,
Yeah, you're talking $6,000-7,000 to come and tow one of those off. It's not
My
cheap.
son's towing bill was $1,200, over $1,200,
Really?
Wow.
and $60 a day.
Okay, other discussion on this, and again, our intent is to bring this back at a future date with some more information. There's no action tonight. We just want to gather your input to then refine a final proposal to bring back. Councilman
Just
Swanson.
one last thought, and it's more of the PR piece of this thing, is that when we do roll this out, we need to really beat the drums and let it be known that we're not making a penny off of this. There's not a single dime or penny that comes into the city coffers. This is about protecting citizen money and the taxpayers and our equipment so that we aren't spending money we don't have to, because we clip a vehicle that is not where it's not supposed to be. And because we're going to get the emails and the phone calls that say this is just another revenue-making, ploy by the city. And I want it to be very clear that we won't be making any money off of this thing.
In fact, we're
We're saving,
preventing situations where their
unnecessary.
vehicles.
Yeah.
Ryan Spells could put an article in there, and the headline could be, "If you park illegally, we'll tow your car and we won't charge you a penny."
Someone else may, but the city will not. Okay, other discussion on this.
I just,
Councilman Turner.
I just think echo the sentiment that we ought to, maybe on your Facebook page, put out a blog right now or something saying right now that reminder, and then also in North Ogden Connection, something, just a reminder. I mean,
Yeah, we'll do that in the November issue.
That's a good idea. Well, maybe even a forecast that this is the kind of ordinance that we're working on and looking at, that we're looking at future towing of vehicles at owner expense.
Now,
Give them a heads up before it actually hits.
related kind of to this, 2 winters ago, I got a call from the plow truck hit his mailbox, his brick mailbox. I don't know if it was built too far out in the road. I don't know that, but he was. Do we make them pay to do that? Do we pay to repair their mailbox? What do we do?
It depends on the circumstances. The council passed, and I think, can't remember if you were here or not, but semi-recently, we passed an ordinance to where the city will pay for it if it was struck by the plow. If it was struck by flying snow coming off a plow, the policy is we don't pay for it, because that is just part of having snow thrown off the road. So if it's actually ran over by the plow, physical contact, yes, we'll pay up to, I think it was $100.
yeah.
I mean, if it's like a $2,000 mailbox, we don't pay for that, sadly. We pay for a replacement mailbox, a functional, practical, not aesthetic mailbox. There have been a few cases with the brick ones and things where we tried to help, do some work to put them back together. But that's the current official policy of the city.
Okay.
So it's unfortunate sometimes because people's mailboxes are hit, including some by snow. If they don't have the rebarb in there, those brick ones will come off the foundation, even from just the weight of the snow.
if you don't have a mailbox, you don't get bills.
And you'll never know.
I never know if you had a ticket.
There you go.
Address.
So that is a council policy, and if any of you feel it should change somehow, that's your discretion. That was actually put in as a council policy.
But just to be clear here, we are not recommending anything but an officer discretion, even though we continue to talk about a couple of tickets and then, or that sort of thing.
That's why I think it will be nice to have Chief Call come for the final one, just so he can hear your feelings and then translate those two to the officers, because it is not a moneymaker. It's not we're trying to inconvenience people. It's just more to encourage those who maybe don't think the winter parking ordinance is serious, help get the word out that it is serious and we need those cars off the road. Okay, anything else on this item? Okay, thank you, John. I'm glad we got to it this time. Fourth time's the charm. We'll go back now to item 7, reconvene our normal agenda order. Item 7, it's election season. Ballots are actually arriving at mailboxes today.
Mine today.
So
Ballots dropped in our drop.
we've already had some. We have had a little steady stream
Where is the
today.
drop box at?
It's right in the lobby, the big blue box.
It's not there right now.
Okay.
I move it into my
Oh,
office.
okay,
when-
overnight.
After business hours.
Okay, all right, because I had a resident, when I was walking in late, a resident asked me, well, where's the drop
Oh,
box?
okay.
Oh, sorry.
So Annette, our city recorder in charge of our elections, please talk to us about poll workers.
Mayor and council, the state code requires the governing body to appoint poll workers, and their compensation. In the resolution, we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 poll workers, one of those being a poll manager. The poll workers are paid a sum of $145 per voting day, and that includes their training, and the poll manager receives $200. And this resolution is before you.
Have a resolution number?
Yes, just 1 minute. 12-2017.
Mayor, I would move that we approve Resolution 12-2017, approving poll workers and the associated compensation.
Second.
Thank you. We have a motion and a second to approve a resolution for poll workers for this year's election.
I'd like to ask a question about it. I'm sure you do this, but how do you vet them to make sure that we don't have some criminal background with somebody that's handling things like that?
Stuffing the box.
I mean, to me, I don't think it would happen, but.
You know, when
It
I chose the poll workers, and they were never vetted like that. They were citizens that came in and asked if they could work for us. Weber County trained them for me. Weber County selects the poll workers now. I don't select them. They select them. We've contracted with them, and that was part of the contract. So I don't know, but I send out email to all of you about going to look at the election process, how they get the ballots, and how they handle them when they go in. That would be a really good question to ask them, but I'll send that question out to them also.
Okay.
And so is it uniform in the pay amount all over the county?
It's uniform. It's all the same. The only difference here is I get the very best judges, election judges, poll workers, because I always give them breakfast and a late lunch for dinner.
So do they get to choose where they want to be, or do they have to be a resident of our city to work here?
They can choose where they want to be when they call them. They don't have to be a resident of our city because we are a poll center, a voting center, so anyone in Weber County can vote at our voting center.
It's all part of the brave new world of mail elections that I still have mixed feelings about. I'm a traditionalist, but I know times are changing, so there you go. Any other discussion on this item?
All those ballots with Jim Urey as a write-in that came in earlier today.
Destroy them.
Okay, we'll start the
Can't
voting
decide
with
who to vote for. It's always
Councilman Satterthwaite.
What's that?
Once again, the voting on to approve the poll judges and compensation.
Yes.
Councilman Uri.
Yes.
Councilman Swanson.
Yes.
Councilman Turner.
Yes.
Councilwoman Stoker.
Yes.
Okay, thank you. That motion passes then 5-0, and we'll have those judges in place for Election Day in a few weeks. Okay, back to John. Let's talk about food trucks. Item number 8, some changes came out of state law relative to home occupations and food trucks, and so we need to have some discussion, council, on amending our ordinances accordingly.
So, council, as many of you are aware, at the League of Cities and Towns meetings, they talked on these two ordinances quite a bit. The first one is, they're tied together because they're in the same section, so we're just doing the whole section at the same time. And so what we've done is tried to clarify the language a little bit. The first change that you see here is more stylistic, just rephrasing it, but it's the same exceptions apply. Basically says people have to get a license if they're in the city.
Has ours got this correction on, the one we had on our website? Or just-
No, the one you see is the clean version that this is a track change version of.
You've already changed what's read there.
Right, so you can see that right here it says except as set forth below. So that language is in your ordinance. It's at the end of the very first line under subsection A.
Okay.
And so
Make
this,
that, can you make it larger?
we can.
Be awesome.
Oh, if I can select
My
the right
glasses
screen.
on. I just need my binoculars.
Get your binoculars.
So, the real first change, this is something actually stated in state code, is this section. This is a new section, subsection 8, that says any business operated by individuals under the age of 18 do not have to get a business license.
Lemonade stand.
And then I've added some additional language that isn't in the state code, but to make it really clear, that it's also businesses that don't give money to people over 18. So the idea couldn't be, I can't hire a bunch of kids to go sell fruit around town, once a year and say, oh no, they're all under 18, but then I get the profits. So the way this is set up is that the workers and the profits have to stay with people who are under the age of 18. Once it goes above 18, then so the state code didn't tie that up, and so we're allowed in our ordinance language to tie it up a little closer and say, hey, we're defining this nuance as money can't go to people over the age of 18 as well. Does that make sense? But I did add the little caveat at the end that says unless it's the repayment of goods and supplies, so that like if mom buys you your lemonade, you can pay her back. Or if you go and buy wholesale peaches from one of the local farmers and sell them in a fruit stand, you can pay them money, but you're keeping the profit from the business. The next section, this deals with home occupations, and this is what we hashed through the last time we talked about this. So this is down on page, 3, at the very bottom, subsection G. And this is the idea that says if you're a home business, which is what the state code has said, you don't have to pay a fee. It doesn't mean you don't have to get a license. So we've set ours up so they still have to register with the city. They just don't have to pay a fee. And then it gives this list of 6 items that the council talked about. This is a direct pull out of the South Jordan language that we discussed the last time we talked about this, probably 6 weeks ago, that focuses on the idea that these are 6 businesses that will, as a matter, it has a rebuttable presumption, meaning that the owner can still say, no, I don't have an impact on the neighbors, but they have to come and prove to the business official that they don't have the impact. But the idea is that anything that's a home, child, daycare, or adult service will still need a business license. Anything that attracts more than 10 vehicle trips per day, for example, a salon, like the Cherry on the Hill salon, they probably bring in more than 10 vehicles a day, even though they're technically in a commercial zone, but if they were in a residential area. If it's has more than just the individuals living in the home, you need a business license. So if you have an outside worker, technically our code doesn't allow it, but if in the case it ever does, then this provision will make them get a license. If they have to get a fire inspection or get a license from another health, like a state health department or another department or agency. And then the last one is if there's overnight parking. which would include residential rentals, meaning so people who are renting houses full-time or for a long-term or short-term will have to get a business license, or at least pay the fee.
Do we allow them to park on the street from 11 p.m. to 6 p.m.?
Not in the wintertime. And so these are the provisions that the council said last time we were good with. Are there any changes that you want to make to this list? Anything that you thought of in the meantime?
John, I read through this, and I'm just wondering, there's some language in here about, for example, if the money's going to a charity, they don't have to get licensed, does it?
So that's a provision that was in the existing ordinance.
Sure.
That
But I guess the thing I'm wondering about is, I don't think, we haven't had it so much recently, but in years past, we'd have these youth groups that somebody'd bring them in a van and drop them off, and they'd go door to door in your city selling cleaning solutions or whatever, and they'd say, now, we're part of a youth group, and this money's going to such and such a place. Those certainly probably ought to be licensed.
So what our ordinance currently says, if it's minors, I'm trying to make sure I find it in the right spot, or if it's people under the age of 18, but it has to be tied to a school fundraiser, and so that's the current.
Let's say some of these guys, I remember they'd come and they'd sell us these cleaning solutions. They'd come to your porch and they'd say, now look at how this will clean this off, and then they squirt it in their mouth and say, it won't even hurt me, but it's cleaned all this junk off your window.
And they don't leave.
And some of them they're over 21, but they're brought in by van loads to do
Supposed to
that.
have a solicitor's license.
I was going to say, would that come
City
under the
requires.
solicitation?
So what? So that there's two different provisions, and the one there's two, and so I got what I just said confused with the other provision that deals with solicitors specifically. And in that section, it talks about it's got to be tied to a school fundraiser sort of a thing, and it's got to be someone under the age of, I think it was 16, but it might be 18. This provision, what it says is any business in the city, so they're actually operating the business in the city, if they are a church, school, religious, or benevolent purpose. So that's the way the language is now. I haven't tweaked that at all. But the idea is that the Baptist church, the LDS church, the charter schools, the others, they can have events and not need to get business licenses, for selling baked goods or whatever they're going to do. The solicitor section deals with the more specifics on at what point the commercial activity they have to get the solicitor's license. But I think we tightened that up a few years ago, but I can bring that back at a future meeting if you'd like to talk about solicitor's license.
Well, unless you bring it back in the next couple of months, you'll have to deal with these guys.
We're going to call Jim on speakerphone.
Did you bring it back for the last meeting in December and make sure it's the last item?
That's a Christmas party, so what?
Well, and so I know that recently, because we do get a lot of calls about solicitors in our business licensing. Our police officers get calls. We haven't seen lots of the truckloads happening lately. We have seen people who the solar companies, some of them haven't gotten their solicitor's license before they start selling in the city. And we actually had a couple individuals who were given criminal citations because the officer said, hey, you can't be here without a solicitor's license. And they said, oh, okay, and then they didn't leave. And so the officer found them again and said, oh, you got your warning, it's time to, pay a fee. Or go to court is what it ends up happening.
Okay, I haven't noticed it much in the last few years, but used to be all the time, those solicitors were around.
So those are all the provisions that relate to home occupations.
Mm-hmm.
The next half of it, which is 4.1-12, this is entirely new. So this whole section, it's probably easier just to go off the document you have in front of you, because the whole section is completely from scratch, and the council can make any changes that you feel are appropriate on this one. The basic gist of the ordinance is that food trucks can operate and park in the commercial area on the city streets. That's the way it's been written. Provided that they stay 80 feet away from any sidewalk, or not sidewalk, any curb cut, crosswalk, or fire hydrant, and 10 feet away from each other. And they have to orient so that the food truck door or window is on the sidewalk side, not in the street. Or they can do any commercial property in the city which has given them written permission, and they have to have written permission, and they do have to get a business license from the city, but it's 25% of the regular business license fee if they can prove that they're already licensed in another Utah jurisdiction. So they have another valid business license and another valid health certificate, which includes the food handler's permit. So that would typically be someone in Davis County or Salt Lake County who wants to come up here, or a lot of times it might be someone in Weber County who wants to operate in North Ogden, but they've been in Roy, type of thing. And then typically with that, every county is a little different, but most counties require a fire inspection as part of that approval, that make sure they got fire extinguishers and all that kind of stuff. This ordinance also still allows the city to inspect the trucks if we want to. So our code enforcement person can go out and verify documents and that sort of stuff if there's a problem. Any question about that portion of it? Yeah, Councilman Turner?
So we call it food trucks. Is that and the only reason I'm asking this question is some of them are trailers. And you have these little taco wagons that are downtown Ogden. They park there for a day and then they drive off. I mean, would that be under this classification? And then the other thing too is I know a guy, great family and everything, and they actually have they sell sunglasses out of looks like a food truck, but you open it up, they sell sunglasses.
He's got a big trailer.
Yeah,
he's got a big
so would that be under this same provision, or do we have to do something different for that, or do we, instead of calling it food trucks, say vending trucks or something like that?
So the way it's written is geared just towards food trucks, because that's the exception that the state legislature gave. So what I've got,
Okay.
with the exception of where they're able to be located, everything else we've talked about up to this point is tied directly to the state statute, which is you have to allow them, if they're licensed somewhere else, you can charge them a fee, but it has to be less. It has to be directly related to the cost associated with giving them the fee or giving them the license. And so then we added in the language about distances because, for example, if someone wants to park out in front of Pizza Pie Cafe or Kurt's, we want them far enough away from the curb cuts so that they're not blocking the view down the street for people trying to pull out into traffic. And so it was a safety concern. The state code specifically says you can't regulate how far they have to stay away from other businesses. The only thing you can regulate is safety type of things. So that's one, or that's kind of the focus of the first, what I've which is down under, this is subsections F and G, is kind of the other component of this discussion, which is what I'm calling special event permits and private events. Special events would be city-sanctioned events or events that utilize city property, typically a street or a right-of-way. The idea being that if you want to park on a city street as part of a carnival or something and have the food trucks there, then you need to get permission from the city to do it because of the in and out traffic, safety concerns, things like that. But if you're doing if you're doing a private event, best example of this we've seen is the schools that do fundraisers, the elementary school or the junior highs. They'll actually use their parking lot for the food trucks, and so they're on private property. I mean, it's technically public property because the school owns it, but we don't have a say in what goes on the school parking lot. And so what we've done there is said they're allowed to do it, but there again, the food trucks and the operator of the event still have to get a food handler's permit for the event, but they don't have to get a business license from the city. So the idea is if they come into town as part of an organized event, They don't need a business license. It's only they need a business license if they're coming regularly, and they pay the discounted business license if they're licensed someplace else. So that's the way it's been written. That's the way we've been treating them for particularly the private events for the schools that have done fundraisers, is we've just said, make sure you get a food handler's permit from the county and that your trucks are safe and sanitary. And so we just tell them they should be double checking the licenses. But most, I actually don't know of a jurisdiction that's seen an issue recently with food truck handlers who aren't properly licensed, because my understanding is people won't frequent them because I think they have to post the license in a visible spot, and so people won't go there if they're not properly licensed for obvious reasons. Is there any issue with this idea that private or even these special event permits, do you want them to need to obtain a business license from the city or anything like that?
Well, I have a question on that. I want to go back to number D2.
Okay.
Food trucks may not park in parks or in public parking lots. Is there a time during a special event that they may do that? If so, I would think that we would want to finish that sentence and say, except for when it's connected with a special event sanctioned by the city or something like that.
I think that's a great.
Like Cherry Days?
Yeah, and really, I'm thinking, the first one that always comes to my mind is, I think about the equestrian, that's an equestrian park. And they have food trucks come up there during that kind of thing they have up there, the junior posse thing. And I think if we just put an except for phrase in there, that fix that.
Okay, so something like this, I'll zoom in on it, or I'll try to. So it says, food trucks may not park in parks or public parking lots unless an appropriate special event permit has been obtained. Would that cover what?
Yeah, because we wouldn't give that permit unless it was sanctioned by the city.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Okay.
I'm okay with that, yeah.
Other discussion on this item, and then also we'd like to know how you'd like to proceed. If you're comfortable taking action on this, if you'd like some time to study it further now that you have the final version, we'll bring it back. So discussion or ideas on how you'd like to proceed.
I'm okay.
I'm okay
I'm
with
ready
it.
to move.
Yeah.
We have an ordinance number?
2017-13.
Oh, Phil.
I've been elected the,
Yeah, you're the official ordinance guy.
okay, you get resolutions then.
No.
Mayor, I'd move that we approve ordinance 2017-13
No, -23.
-23, 2017-23, amending specific provisions related to home occupations, food trucks, and other businesses which operate in North Ogden City municipal limits.
Second.
Okay, we have a motion and a second to accept this ordinance related.
Including the language change.
Okay, amended motion with the language that was added in relative to special event permits.
Saw you
Second.
leaning in, John.
Do you concur?
Second.
Okay, second concurs with that amended motion. So the amended motion is to approve the ordinance with the addition of the language proposed by Councilman Uri. Is there any further discussion? We'll start the voting with Councilman Uri,
Yes.
Councilman Swanson,
Yes.
Councilman Turner,
Yes.
Councilwoman Stoker,
Yes.
and Councilman Satterthwaite.
Yes.
Okay, thank you. That motion passes 5-0. Thank you, John, for the updates on those. We've already completed item 9, so we'll go to item 10, which is discussion under action to approve phasing and project plan for Barker Park Amphitheater. I'll be the presenter on this item. And I sent you a presentation, council members. There's a slightly updated version that's printed for you. None of the numbers I sent you changed, just a few new things were added in the printed version that is also posted online. And I'm glad it's only 7:30, so we have several hours to go through this item in great detail, as much as you'd like.
Blake, did you get a copy of this?
Does anybody want to make a motion on that?
Yeah, I make a motion, we have a half-hour discussion on this.
No.
Oh, let's shoot
Go
for
15 minutes.
17. Well, no, there's money involved here, so.
So,
There's a baseball playoff game tonight. Is there? Just throwing that out.
I'll go through the first slides pretty quickly because I'd given them to you, council members, last week. Next. Or does this control it, John? Is this turned
Give it a
turn
shot
on?
and see if it'll. Yeah.
Thank you.
I'll just.
Oh, it wasn't on. Okay, just a second. Okay, so we have our design committee, again, that's been working on a design for the amphitheater and a budget. There's the members there, myself, council members Satterthwaite and Stoker, John Call, our Parks and Rec director, Mark Daniels from Weber High, and of course, a great team from the architects and from Wadman Construction. This is the proposed site plan. We went over this also in detail last week. Next. We ran into, now that we actually have a completed design, a proposed design, we found that the estimate for the design that we have come up with is higher than the initial very rough estimates our city engineer had given for a variety of reasons, and those are outlined on the next page. I'll just highlight those again briefly. We've had almost a year of time, and construction costs have been rising just because the economy is doing so well. The building currently contemplated is larger because of some additional functionality that was put in, and of course, a larger building translates to a higher cost. There's a lot more site work in the current design with the proposed sidewalks and plaza areas and things that are part of the site plan that was not included in the original estimate because it simply didn't exist. It wasn't an idea at that time. Additionally, the concession building and the ticket booth and the restrooms are a separate building now, which has led to a new set of utilities need to be drug and also just the cost of a separate building. But that is a high recommendation that the concessions and restrooms not be the same building as the amphitheater. We've added in a new parking lot, which was not included in the original cost estimates to take into account concerns of the neighbors related to not having enough parking. And then lastly, after we got a geotechnical survey done of the site, there are not soils concerns, but unfortunately there's a lot of what's called undocumented fill that was brought in to build the original amphitheater, and it's not known if that is good enough to be structural fill. We don't want to risk that with a beautiful, nice amphitheater, so the strong recommendation of our geotechnical study was to put geopiers underneath the building to ensure it has the stability it needs, part of the original estimate, because we didn't know it would be needed. So those have combined to give a new estimated cost for this facility of $4.3 million. We can't do that all at once. It's far more than our financial capacity or what we would be able to do. And so the committee has recommended doing a phase one that would be the building itself and all functions associated with the building, and then the concrete pad and the installation of the first 300 chairs directly in front of the amphitheater. And then that would be phase one, and everything else would be in phase two. The plaza, the sidewalks, the new parking lot, additional site work, landscaping, those kind of things in the blue shaded area would be in a phase two if it could all be done in a second piece. Parking we went over last week. I don't think we need to necessarily hit it much more, but we have a good parking plan we're working on how we would park larger events in the interim time before that new parking lot is constructed, how we would find additional parking for larger events. Because no matter what amount of parking we build, there's always the possibility of something larger that's going to need more parking than we want to have. And there's some great options you can see around the amphitheater itself in this map that Tiffany has put together. Next slide. So the recommendation where we kind of ended last week was the design committee has looked at this and is sending recommendation to the council that we go ahead and stay with the recommended design and then phase the project as our financial situation deems, rather than cutting back on the design to try and reduce the cost of the project, because we feel that would reduce the ultimate functionality of the building and its service to the citizens. And so our recommendation is to complete the phase one that we talked about next year, and then another phase or two based on our financial situation in the future. Now we come to the new information for you tonight. You'd asked some more information from us about how we would envision being able to pay for this facility, what would be the sources of funding. Excuse me, here, Council, from our new budget is the sheet of all the city's funds, and this will be a great reference for you as we go throughout this discussion to kind of refer back and forth to. The ones that I would highlight is the first, the city's general fund is in excellent financial shape. The ending budget at the end of last fiscal year on June 30th, 2017, earlier this year, was approximately 1.6 million, and then we expect that's going to be slightly higher at the end of the current fiscal year that we're in. And in fact, even higher likely than this number, because the sales tax revenues are higher than anticipated. So the general fund is one obvious source of some portion of this amount to complete the project. Another, skipping down a few lines to about 2/3 of the way down the sheet, is the Capital Projects Fund. And the Capital Projects Fund is fairly healthy as well. Started off this year with a balance of over $1 million, and we believe that would be a source as well that could be used. Those are the two sources that you'll see on the next page I'll be recommending we consider for this project for city funds, as well as park impact fees, which are not indicated separately on this sheet, but I have a discussion of on the following sheet. So just kind of keep this one handy. We'll refer back to it. But on the next page, I've outlined the 4 city sources of revenues for helping pay for this project. Currently, you have already approved $1.1 million, which a third of which was a grant from the Weber County RAMP grant program for phase 1 of construction. The next and most logical source of funding for this project are park impact fees. The park impact fees, of course, are collected on every new home, apartment, and townhome that is built in the city. And let's just go to the next page, John, and we'll come back to this one, council members, for the rest of those, but I just wanted to show you some details of our park impact fees. So last year, we had budgeted, and this is last fiscal year, we had budgeted to receive $306,000 in park impact fees. We ended the year with about $30,000 higher than projected, $334,000. So park impact fee collections have been higher than expected, which is a good sign. This year, we've budgeted $395,000 in park impact fees, largely because we expect more building permits to be taken out this year than even last year. And the second chart I've put together shows how those numbers are shaking out so far for this budget year. In the first 3.5 months of this budget year, since July 1st, there have been 40 single-family home permits issued for approximately $108,000 or $7,000 in park impact fee revenue, and 33 townhomes for another $53,000. So a total of $159,000 in park impact fees thus far this fiscal year. That represents approximately 40% of the amount of that $395,000 that we budgeted for the year has been already collected. 29% of the year has elapsed. So our collection of park impact fees again this year, at least so far, is trending higher than the amount of elapsed time. Granted, we have the winter, which the numbers will now drop off for the rest of this year, but they'll pick up very early in the year next year as new homes start again. So we expect that we will hit the park impact fee budgetary estimate of $395,000 this year, and as the Utah housing market and economy in general continue to be exceptionally strong, we expect that next year will also be a strong building year, and that there will continue to be a good stream of revenues from the park impact fees, which, all signs are positive relative to park impact fees. And going back to the previous page now, that's why the park impact fees, as far as city revenues, seems to be the best revenue source for this project as it pertains to city funding. It's the most natural source. It's collected by the city on new homes for new parks and recreational projects. So this is the exact purpose for this revenue. It's the only way this revenue can be used. It can't be used for the roads. It can't be used for the police. It has to be used for new park and recreation facilities. Other sources after park impact fees, again, the general fund I mentioned there, it's in excellent shape. It's been growing for several years. We're close to the maximum we can have in there. So we could take some money out of the general fund as well and still be in excellent financial shape. Capital Projects Fund, same as I mentioned before. And then perhaps, most importantly, the sale of our existing detention basin on 2700 North. With the receipt of the United States Department of Agriculture grant, whereby we should be able to do the entire detention basin irrigation and recreation pond project in 1 year, instead of having to do that in multiple phases, we would be able to sell that detention basin property sooner than expected and be able to use some of those revenues for this project, as with our grant, we'll no longer have to direct those revenues to the project, the pond project itself. And roughly expected revenues there, I've put $1.5 million for that nearly 7 acres of property, which I think is a very reasonable estimate. We've done some appraisal work and other things that we'll be presenting to you soon in a closed meeting, but I feel that's a very reasonable value for that over 6.5 acres of commercial property there on 2700 North. So those are the research into each of the funds that I feel are reasonable, judicious sources of city funds towards this project. Any questions on any of those before we go on to external sources of funding? Okay, so external funding sources are listed here. Of course, Weber ramp grants. We've already received a generous grant from the ramp program. We've received, nothing's ever known for certain, but we've received encouragement to apply for another grant this year for the project, and that's what we're intending to do in January. And then we would try for a third one to finish out the project the year following from the Weber ramp program. They don't get as many arts projects, so this has been something exciting for them, because most of the larger projects are traditionally parks, but yet the arts is supposed to be an equal component of the ramp program, and I think that's why it's nice. This is a project that kind of fits a niche that has been traditionally not as commonly presented, or projects of this kind for the arts and culture piece, and I think our chances there are good. I've approached our legislator, particularly Representative Fossen, about a possible appropriation for the project. We're working on that diligently right now as well for the next session. Community donations will be important of all pieces. We're putting a program together for selling bricks, selling anything, a way people could contribute. A fence post piece, or different ways families could and businesses contribute, and then have some recognition at the amphitheater in the form of community donations. And then lastly, probably our biggest potential source dollar-wise, I think community will provide a lot of numbers, a lot of citizens who get involved, but maybe the largest source to get a larger grant would be from the foundations, the charitable foundations that exist in the state. Let's go to the next page. I just did some research to find some information about what are charitable foundations in Utah doing, and you can see just the top giving foundations in the state here. This page is approximately $45 million in annual giving from these foundations, and almost half of that is from the biggest two, the Eccles and Huntsman foundations. So there's some extremely generous foundations. Some of these are focused quite specifically on the arts. Some of them even say that, like the Questar Corporation for the Arts Foundation. But I wanted to also show you something. I've started discussions with some of these foundations, but the biggest thing we're waiting for, we need a design, and we need to know we're cleared to, put this design in front of people, that this is what is going to happen, so that we can ask them to help fund it. Next slide. This is just a screenshot I took, for example, from the Eccles Foundation. They're the largest charitable foundation in the state, almost $20 million in annual giving. And you'll see the first of their categories is arts and culture. And very specifically, they funded a number of theaters, projects similar to ours in large amounts over the years. In this little chart you see, just over a 4-year period, they put $137 million total dollars of grants in that period for arts and culture. So it's one of the biggest components of what their foundation does, and that's why I'm very confident. I don't know it'll be this foundation or another, but I'm confident we can make a great presentation and get some money from some of these foundations towards the project, because it's the exact kind of thing that they fund, is art and cultural projects through cities or nonprofits. I've already met with them and found out that as a city, we are just as eligible as a 501c3 nonprofit, and they're eagerly awaiting information and an application from us. So let's go back, John, if we just could. One more. So those external funding sources, I think most of you know I don't usually overpromise something that I don't think we can accomplish, and I'm confident we could raise half the money of that 4.3 or thereabouts, 45%, 55%, right in that range of the cost of the amphitheater through these external sources: ramp, legislature, community donations, and then foundation grants. So I think that is very reasonable out their number. I do think it's very reasonable, given the foundations we have, given the focus on the arts that these foundations, many of these foundations have. I think that's a doable number. However, let's go ahead, John, to alternate scenarios. If, worst case, that doesn't happen, the economy crashes, housing collapses, we don't get impact fees that we're thinking, If worst case happens, the nice thing, this project's very scalable. If we get the building done, and next year we're looking at asking you for some more funding to do the inside, and hey, the economy's changed, something terrible's happened, then we finish the building and leave it for a year or 2 or 3. We'll still have a great shell that can do performances. We won't have the separation into the rooms, the different pieces inside, but it would still be very usable and could then be finished at a future date. The project can be scaled at different times to pull something out or put it in as the funding from the city and external allows. It's not like tonight we're asking for a blank check to approve $4.3 million. Not at all. In fact, no money's being asked for tonight. You've already approved the 1.1. That's what we're starting with. We'll be coming back early next year to request another appropriation for phase 2, but it will be based on how much we've been able to raise, what other things are looking like, and ask for the fiscal year 19 money probably a little bit early to be able to do the rest of Phase 1 in the spring. But at that time, the council will have the option to review what has happened and decide if that should be appropriated. So tonight, to be clear, nothing's being asked for more funding. More than anything, we're asking to approve the design, the general plan for funding the project. And then, because if we don't have that design set, we can't start work if the building needs to eventually get shrunk in size, for example. That's the kind of thing we need tonight, that this is the design we're agreeing to do. We have a tentative plan, a tentative financial plan that will come back to the council in phases, and the council will have the opportunity at that time to say whether they approve it or not. And if not, then we just have to do more phases. Things have to be pushed a little bit more into the future based on the financial situation. So that's where I feel this is a great project. We have a solid plan for fundraising, for how to pay for it. There are a lot of options, internal to city funds and external private funds, and this project can be done. It can be done successfully, and it can be done a variety of ways based on how that funding turns out as we go along and actually start getting in front of these donors and foundations. The last thing I wanted to mention, some questions had come up about operating costs, which is important. We've given a lot of thought to this, once the theater or the amphitheater is built, what is happening at that point for how are we paying to operate this? Here's all the sources that we're looking at to operate year to year the amphitheater. First, we'll be applying every single year for ramp donations for specific shows or for the whole season. Once again, when ramp money comes in, roughly I think $2 million to the county every year, a third of it goes to arts, a third goes to parks, and a third goes to major projects. The arts third, our city has never been able to access because we've never had arts or cultural activities. That is a great source of money for, $10,000 for a specific show, or $20,000 or $30,000 for the whole season. That arts third of the ramp money every year will be asking for money from ramp to help support our season, exactly as the Ogden Amphitheater does, as Weber State does with the symphonies, with the Ogden Ballet does. They get some ramp money every single year to help put on their season. So that'll be a big part of the operating costs. Season sponsors. We'll ask our banks, our credit unions, our construction companies, our foundations, our local companies to be a season sponsor. Put in $5,000, you get mentioned in the program. Put in $10,000, you're in the program, and there's a flyer about you, this kind of a thing to help sponsor the season every single year. We'll collect season donations. Ticket sales, of course. Everyone who comes to an event is going to pay for a ticket, and that is a great source of revenue. Roadshow revenues. If a traveling show, as we expect to have a number of those come through, they're going to pay the city on top of whatever the ticket, revenues that they get. There'll be a fee paid to the city for use of the facility. Advertising and concession revenues during the events themselves, and honestly, I think the smallest piece will be city sponsorship. I'm very confident that these will be certainly the majority, and I expect much larger than the majority of the operating costs. I think it will take some city sponsorship, as do our parks, as does our pool, but I think it will be something on the order of like the pool. Our operating revenues cover nearly is between 85 and 90% of the pool's operating expenses. I think the amphitheater would be similar, a small amount coming from the city, and perhaps if these other things turn out well, perhaps not at all. I don't think that's unreasonable, but I like to try and give a fair estimate. I do think there may be a need for some city sponsorship, but I honestly believe it will be very minimal compared to the cost of operating the amphitheater, because there's so many other sources that are out there and that other amphitheaters are successfully using to help operate their facilities. So that's just a little bit of discussion on what we're kind of anticipating for the operating costs. So with that, let me just open it up, council members, for any questions or discussions you'd like to have on any of these items.
Well, I noticed, Mayor, I went through this sheet here for Phase 1 and Phase 2, and I had some questions on that. We have an excavation and haul-away and rough grading at the detention pond. Is that because we're making that a bigger detention pond, or what is that? What's the reason for that?
Yes, that is,
Deeper? I mean, we can't make it any wider.
it's for the new parking lot. John, do you remember that? It's for the new parking lot and
Yeah, so let
the new
me,
roof of the building, which will be
A
larger.
new detention
It's-
basin?
right here, this yellow area is a detention basin to get the runoff from the new parking lot.
Okay,
And
so
then
that,
there's some other work back here that'll catch the runoff from the building.
that's not that current detention basin, sits at the southwest corner of the subdivision then?
Right, that will stay the same.
Yeah, this is one on our site.
Okay, I think, I would still like, and I probably won't even be on here when you vote for the money, but I really still think we ought to look at not having a concession building, but having people come in with the food trucks and the like, and then we don't have to have a concession building that gets broken into like the one at Oaklawn Park has done over many, many years, is always getting broken into. And, we don't have that expense to run a concession and hire people to run it. We bring in people. That could cut some expenses there. And I think that we probably would still have to extend the 8-inch culinary water main and fire hydrant, even if we didn't do that.
For the restrooms.
And I think the restrooms, you can't get away without restrooms, but I think you're probably even with the restrooms, you're going to have to bring in porta potties because, and
yeah.
there's
Some events.
We're planning on that this would basically cover a kind of expected crowd, but a large event, we're not going to build enough for that because it'd be too much money. So we'd bring the porta potties.
I looked at some gate installations. I don't know what those are all about. There's 12-foot gates, 3 of them, $2,000 a piece, and 8-foot gates, $1,600 a piece, $4,800. I don't know what those
That's
are for.
to have additional gates around the perimeter because the perimeter will be fenced,
For where people can enter? Is that
can
what that is?
exit. They would all enter at the same place,
Okay.
but it would be for emergency exits, or at the end of the night, all the gates would be open so people could get out quicker.
And then I thought, when I looked, one reason I talk about that concession thing, I looked at that line right there on constructing restrooms and concession and ticketing, and that's 1/10 of the whole budget. Those two lines there equal $435,081. That's 10% of the whole budget, just for those buildings. I think that's a little much. I don't know, Carl, you might know more about that kind of thing. I don't know.
Don't know anything about the buildings, really.
And I think, I compliment you on the work you've done on it, Mayor. I do, and maybe the committee members can share some things with me that I haven't had a chance to hear or know. And that would be, when we're looking at this thing and studying it, what kind of studies did we do with other like existing structures, and what are their hard costs? I mean, you've got a list on the back of here of some identified operating costs, but we don't have a list of what we think those hard costs might be. I'd like to know, what is a hard cost, for example, on someone that's going to manage that place? What kind of a salary are we going to look at paying them? And I would like to see you come back and say, and I know it's a lot of work, but I'd like to see us contact some of these amphitheaters and say, okay, what are your hard costs to run this place every year? You know, then you have a target to go out when you're looking for donations and you know, I see that. Well, Phil, you're on the foundation board for Weber School District. You know, let me tell you what, I used to go, the bank would sponsor tables at some of these things like this Janie Nye cancer thing and different things, and I'd get asked every once in a while to go to them. And the sponsors were always the same people, and the sponsors were like his foundation that I was donating to then donates to somebody else's project, and all the foundations are there just that we're donating to the foundation thinking that money's going to Weber School District children, and it's not. It's going to all these little parties they're attending, a big portion of it, you know. So I think we need to me, I want to see some more hard costs of what, and again, I compliment you in your plan. I think that there's, and I guess I'm not going to be here when you vote for the money.
I bet you are.
No,
You're sitting right out there.
I was, no, I just, you know how conservative I am. That's just not any secret to any of you. I'd hate to see us borrow from funds that we may have like a need, and we're not saying we're borrowing from the water fund, but you know, I'd hate to see us borrow from a fund and then we have a surprise like a bunch of water meters go out or something and we say, oh gosh, where are we going to get that money now? You know, and when I campaigned for city council 4 years ago, there was a question asked to me over here about would you support recreation? And I said recreation would be the last on my list to support. I would support fire and police protection. I would support public works department. I would support roads and those things. And if we ever had a shortfall on the budget, where would I cut it? And it would be recreation. And so my feeling is this, and part of that comes from not only from my upbringing, but because of sitting in countless meetings where people came to us with very good presentations in banking situations and said, we'd like you to loan us this money. And when it was all said and done, they walked out the door without the loan because the plan, although it looked good, was not sustainable. And I don't have enough knowledge here to know if this is a sustainable thing into the future. I don't know what it would cost us to run this thing, and if those, you know, and some of these things are, I think your sources you identified good. I campaigned on a thing that I would vote for needs of the city before I would vote for wants. And I think of the needs that we have with the finishing Monroe and some of these other grants that we've got that we're going to have to come up with money for. And in my limited opinion, I don't know that we have those things well enough thought through that we're going to have all the money we need for all of those things. We might, and maybe you have that in the big picture. I don't know, but if I were to vote on the money tonight, I'd have to say, you know, I see this as a want and not as a need, and so I would vote. I think that if you can phase it, yeah. But and it sticks in my mind, I start thinking about, we built a public works building, which is a need. And we paid $3 million something for it, and now we're going to build an amphitheater that's a want for more money than we paid to furnish stuff for our public works people. That just, you know, and I mentioned last time, I hope it goes. I hope that your plan is good and it's successful. I wouldn't want to do anything to disrupt it, but at this point, if we were to vote on it tonight, I wouldn't vote for any funding if we were, even though you've done a great job in looking at sources. Compliment you on that.
Councilman Satterthwaite?
So we have approved some funding here, and
Yeah.
I think that, I mean, I've been really concerned a week and a half ago when we realized that this budget was going to be higher. I will admit that, and I think, I wish that the rest of you could be in the, exposed to these experts. I say experts. We have some people in this design group that have a lot of experience, and they bring the experience from all these theaters down along the Wasatch
But
Front.
do they bring the experience of managing those theaters?
To some extent, I would have to say that we probably don't have a complete picture of what that, but we have had some discussion, and you know, the scope of what we would try to do will kind of build as time goes on. But they have opened up the vision for me as to what this can be. There's a reason why, when we realized we didn't have enough money, that we needed to stick with the basic theater part itself, that has tremendous value in and of itself. If we're all sitting on blankets out there and we bring in porta potties and food trucks, we can get by and have a really nice presentation there. And the Weber High Department has shown what can be done with community members that are, I mean, there are a lot of community people out here that would like to be involved in this kind of thing and are in the theaters that are around us, and I think would be here, along with what talent is being brought up at Weber High.
I don't have any doubt about that. I think there'll be a lot of community support for things as far as, will you volunteer your time, will you make some costumes, will you do this, will you do that? But still, I don't have any hard costs of what it's gonna cost us to operate this thing.
Well, and I think, and I hope that the future council will ask that. I see the mayor taking notes, and I think he has the right vision for what we need to get our arms around in order to make this thing sustainable. There has been discussion of a full-time individual that you have to kind of ratchet that up, and at some point in time, when you do get a full-time individual, you've got a program going. But I see. What I see is the options here for us to have a really nice theater and just have the theater, if that's where we're at financially, with blankets and no seats, and that we can phase this thing. I see also, so there's the value to the phasing aspect of it. It's important that I think that we have the park impact fees, and this is a really good place to put that. And then I'm not sure exactly how to articulate this, but I think that there's sort of a synergism when in, you've heard me say the most important thing is the water that goes through these lines in the sewer that is the result of our consumption as a city. And if we don't do those things well, we shouldn't be doing anything. But if a city can move in phases and have a kind of a plan like this where we can get our arms around it and take it as we really can afford it, then I think this provides some of the synergism of a city that gets really attractive to the businesses and to the foundations and to the county and at whole.
Well, and again, I think to really know what that synergism is, you gotta look at these amphitheaters and see what kind of synergism is happening at those ones that are already in existence. You know, if we can talk about synergism, but if we're spending $4.3 million for, and as I have understood from the beginning, this thing was never supposed to make money, just like the swimming pool. So, we gotta, as an employee, do we cover the employees' costs in perpetuity, or the employees, how many ever employees we may have? I think that's one of the questions we need to ask. What is your payroll for, like an Ed Kenley amphitheater, and what are some of your fixed costs? We don't have that.
And we've met with, just so you know, Councilman, Sandy Amphitheater and Ed Kenley and Layton to get some of these detailed discussions going. We're going to do more of it. But we did have a meeting with, specifically with those two to get an idea of exactly that. And the nice thing is, as Councilman Satterthwaite said, that the overhead would be scaled up too. The first year, it probably wouldn't be a full-time person. You know, maybe it would be some part-time personnel in the parks, kind of helping getting it going, or a part-time person. And then as there's enough shows to bring in revenue and, you know, demand and things, then that can be stepped up over time so that the operational expenses are reasonably kept in line with the operating revenues, which would be raising as more shows come in, as the theater gets well-known. So there will be some flexibility in there too, but we will get some additional details from these other amphitheaters we've been meeting with. They also felt there was a synergy between those two, one in Salt Lake County, one in Davis County, and then us here in Weber County, to be able to bring in shows together, and it would go one night at each. So there's a lot of excitement from the other theaters because, again, there's a beautiful one in Ogden, but I think it does kind of a different style of events, often a lot more musical bands and things, and a lot of receptions and weddings and things like that. So I think we would be the natural kind of partner with those others for more of the events that would kind of appeal to our community, the arts and cultural events. So I think, you know, we've already started those discussions too, to help find out ways we could reduce our costs, because we're going to share the cost of bringing that show to town with others.
And they saw that as a positive thing. I think what I heard is that they think that as a whole, adding this theater, they'll be able to attract groups that we wouldn't otherwise have been able to attract.
Because we have three different enough markets. I mean, sometimes our citizens go to Layton, but I've been there once my whole life. You know, it's not that common. It is a drive. Here, we're going to attract a lot of people that probably are not directly competing with them. So that's why they've been pretty open with thinking it's a win-win for all of us, because we're each kind of separated enough from one another. Councilman Turner?
So, tonight, you're just asking, you're not asking for any more money. You're asking for our approval to phase the project.
And for
With
this
beginning phase
design that we're presenting, even though you're not approving the money for it, we're going to start setting in motion the construction of the first phase. As you know, it's got to be a puzzle that fits the next phase. So, for example, cutting the building in half is not possible after tonight, because phase one is putting in the foundations of the building.
Well,
and
correct, but in phase one and then phase two, you even mentioned that in your presentation that if we get to where we can't do certain aspects of it, we won't do it. So
right.
You're basically asking, can we get phase one done?
And
knowing
this
that there's a
design will
potential?
eventually, we're committing to eventually complete this design over a yet to be determined number of phases based on funding.
So how much is phase one? I know it's in here, but say it for the record.
The total amount of phase one, I think, is 3.3 million.
And currently, we have approved 1.1.
1.1. So
Plus.
to do the whole part of phase one, we would be coming back next year for a appropriation of new money, and hopefully kind of seeing where our fundraising is going as well.
So, but we have 1.1 towards the 3.3 or whatever it was, right?
Yes.
And then isn't there a grant in that 1.1? Or is that included?
That's already included, but we'll be
Included,
asking
yeah.
for another one in January that will be part of,
So if we didn't get the grant, we would.
we would
figure
have to
do
not do something.
Okay. So I like the idea of phasing. I would, you know, I like the idea of the two phases, but I would just make the stipulation to understand that it could be 3, 4, 5 phases possibly.
Yes,
Just
those
depending
phases
on how
are
the
pretty
funding-
big.
correct.
That's our hope. If the fundraising turns out well, if park impact fees are still high, we would like to do all that phase one, but it may not work. We may do phase 1A, phase 1B later, as we see how the numbers are actually coming together.
So, and I personally hope we could build the whole thing out and do it, because I think the play that we had was a great experience, and I do agree that we'll have more, and I think we will get sponsorships, and I think it won't become a burdensome on the city. And I think the residents that live in that area, I think that they'll find it's gonna be better than, I mean, it's always the worst-case scenario, and, you know, I don't live that far from there, but it's always worst-case scenario is the way you think, but I think it's gonna be better than, there's gonna be times it's gonna be probably crummy for the residents, probably, possibly, but I think for the most part, it's gonna become a great asset, so, I'm in favor of the phasing and getting started.
I don't have a problem with phasing it, Mayor, as long as we're firm in that we're, you know, we're not gonna come back next year and say, you know, we don't have the money in the budget, but we still wanna build this, you know? We haven't raised any money. We haven't got any sponsors, but we still want you to give us another 2.2 million to get this phase done. I think that would be, then we've lost the confidence of the people that said, yes, let's phase it, you know?
And that's where if the design's approved, I'll be starting tomorrow on following up with the fundraising contacts I've already made, but to get right going to help us start raising some money.
Which begs the question, when you start, when you begin to, we do look for a full-time employee, you better look for a fundraiser, because that's what they're gonna spend a lot of time doing.
Absolutely. Every season, we'll need to raise money for the season sponsors. Councilman Turner.
Just, this is completely not off topic, but they're gonna have to definitely look at the design of coming off of Fruitland. If they're pulling a semi in there, or a couple semis, I don't even know how they make that corner right now, so. That's gonna have to change their
Go
fire
park
plug.
it in Randy's driveway.
So, you know, one other thing we haven't talked much about that kind of changed my pessimist optimism is that grant for the big detention pond that we've got to move. And the
That changed
potential
our
that
lives.
that property can bring in the revenue to pay for it anyway. But we had made some tentative commitments to join with Pineview to get that thing to go financially. And now there's quite a bit of money we're not going to have to pull out of general fund in order for that to happen.
By the way, on that grant, does Pineview get part of that, or is that all come to
Yes,
us?
the 4.5 million is partially to Pineview, partially to us. So, because we're building it together.
And also in the discussions, it has been brought up on Fruitland Drive to get those semis in there.
Okay, good.
It's not been ignored.
Yeah, that'd be a nasty road if you're a semi driver. With the severing donation.
Yes, the Blake Severing Foundation.
Yeah.
I heard he was good for 2 mil.
That'd be 2.2 million, I think.
Was it more than that? Put him down for 4.
Here is kind of my,
Yeah, I think that severing's good for
Pork
3 million.
impact?
Pork impact, yeah, we're gonna start selling pigs.
I think it's
No,
pork,
there's
not
pork, isn't that a political,
That's a stock thing, pork bellies, you know.
No, there's some pork in this budget.
pork projects, you know, we got a federal.
so here's just a list of the, major sources that I see and how I'm optimistic that it could work out with minimal impact to most of the city funds, because the existing is 1.1 million that's been approved. If we get a second ramp grant, hopefully next spring. Donations, which I've.
And the
put
ramp
at
grant, by the
500,000.
way, is we're really optimistic about that. Tiffany
We are
has
optimistic
told
about
me
it.
about the last meeting. She was too, and the mayor said the same thing
Yeah.
based on different other contacts, that they're really looking forward to being able to fund
This
it.
is a very unique project for ramp. Almost everything has been of the major projects, parks, which are great, but this is a unique project, a cultural facility. So a second ramp grant, donations, I put at 500,000. That's kind of the goal I have in my mind, besides the major sponsor, which is 1 to 1.5 million. That's kind of the foundation grant amount.
Now, Mayor, I haven't been involved in a lot of, but I have been involved with some of the Eccles Foundation sponsorships, and typically theirs is a match. Theirs is, we'll give you 1 million if you raise 1 million. So if you don't raise the million, they don't pay the million.
So that's how that $500,000 there is our beginning of that match.
Then park impact fees, we've already put over 300,000 of them from this year, 700,000 more if we just 100% of the next 2 years of park impact fees. In the end, this will be the largest single source of city revenue. It's not road money, it's not water money. It couldn't be used for anything besides new park and recreation projects anyways. Probably total, because about 350 of it's already in here. This is going to be almost 1.1 million over the 3 years, let's say, of the project. So that will be the main source of city contribution. Is the largest single source is the park impact fee, which hopefully can give you some better feeling because it's the only thing it can be used for. That, it can only be used for new park and recreational facilities. Then hopefully a third ramp grant the following year, 2019, to help us finish, I hope, phase 2 at that point. The city general and capital projects funds, I didn't put anything here because there's definitely a possibility if our fundraising goes well, we may not need to use them. But they would be our last kind of source because the sale of the property, now we were planning on having to put that back into the new pond with the Department of Agriculture grant. That should no longer be necessary. And the citizens are not losing out because the CDA, remember, is paying for this whole thing through a higher tax increment. So putting the sale of that property towards this project is kind of like a bonus at this point that has no effect on the budget because our CDA is already reimbursing even the remaining costs we are paying to that pond. So between those, and those are kind of our flex pieces based on what happens here, sponsors and donations and ramp, we will tap into that sale of property and or capital projects and general fund. And that's how we can make it work. So the biggest piece in any event from the city will likely, through it all, be that park impact fees. Thank you. So other discussion on this?
When is this 4 point whatever million payable by the what do you call it, by the government for that pond?
We're meeting with them tomorrow to get all the details, but it's likely that the project will be a little longer because there's a lot of federal requirements, as we know, on projects. So we don't know what those details are, but in either case, it's going to be as the project is done. They won't, give it to us in advance. We'll get it as the project goes along. I'm expecting, based on other grants we've got in the past. So we'll likely have to, I would assume, get some piece as, 10% at this point, 20% at this point, et cetera, as the project progresses.
Is there a chance, there was a talk with this administration at one time that they were gonna cut a bunch of things like that, but once they've awarded that to us, can they take it away? Can they just say, no, we just say no?
I would be shocked if that happened. I mean, I won't say it's impossible, but I don't think so. I think they would cut new projects that haven't been awarded, not a project that has been awarded, because for the administration to be giving out these funds, it means Congress already approved those funds. The administration couldn't be awarding grants if it wasn't passed already by Congress. So I don't think that would happen. But I'll send you a full report either tomorrow or later this week once we've kind of got the details on how that grant will go. But it really, as Councilman Satterthwaite said, has changed the dynamic, because we were expecting to need some park impact fees for that. We were expecting to need more money from capital projects, from general fund for that project, because the CDA is paying for it, ultimately repaying, but it doesn't have money now to do that. And that anchor, or kind of around our necks, is taken away with the federal grant. So we don't need those other funds, we don't think, for that project now. And that makes it a lot more doable to accomplish this as well.
Well, I agree with Carl. I'm okay with phasing, but I just don't want to. I don't want to have our citizens. Well, I won't be on the council, but I'd hate the citizens to come to me and say, "You dirty guy, you voted for this thing, and look what it's costing us out of our budget every year now, because you didn't plan well enough to know what the hard costs were going to be."
And that's something, Councilman, we'll bring back some more details on from our visits with the other amphitheaters. But the nice thing is, it's not, I mean, that's kind of up to us. It's not like, we have to do this or that. We'll base it, I think we should base it on the demand. If the first year we're going to do 5 shows, we don't need a full-time person. We'll have a part-time person. If the next year there's 20 shows, because demand is increased, we're making better relationships with the other amphitheaters, then at that point we justify another person or a full-time person. So,
Probably, could you do 20 shows in a season? I mean, you're talking about the summer, basically.
right.
Well, it'd be pretty tough to put in 20 shows, I would think.
Yeah, yes, I'm just kind of putting that, just a random number there.
A mix of some bigger shows, say 7 or 8, and then a lot of smaller things, local.
Well, and we need to be realistic in what you're going to attract. I mean, I mentioned to you, and go chat with Grant Protzman. And the event center used to bring in some pretty high-powered concerts, but they don't do it anymore because they've lost money on them all the time.
Jim Urey's not going to be doing anything.
It's funny you went there. I was just raising my hand.
No, I'm serious. I ushered those events, and I know, you want me to tell you who attended most of the concerts that they held at the event center? 13 and 14-year-old kids.
I went and saw Peter Frampton there, dude.
Well, you were, what, 10?
No, I was about 17.
I'm serious, and
It's a 13-year-old on steroids.
I would say to
That's
myself, what are these 13 and 14-year-old kids, where are they getting the money to come to these concerts, to pay these ticket prices? I guess mom and dad
Grandpa.
were, not, mom and dad must have been giving them to them, and they would buy souvenirs, while they're there, and they would trash the event center because they would stand up, they'd get jumping up and down, they'd stand up on the seats and start jumping up and down on the seats, and our job was to go ask them to quit jumping up and down on the seats and bring a policeman if they didn't, and that's
Councilman Swanson?
2 things have slowed my heart rate on this from where it was 10 days ago, and that one is the big grant that we're getting from the feds that frees up a lot of money, and also the trust that I have with Cheryl and Lynn, and knowing how fiscally conservative and responsible they are. I'm with Carl. I think come January, whatever the date is, that Jim no longer has a Tuesday night activity. I frankly, Jim, and I'm not just being jokeful here. I'm being dead serious. I think the city would be well served to have you as a part of that committee because of the watchdog that you are. I can't think of another person in this city that would do a better job of making sure that we're going in a good line financially and that we're minding all of our P's and Q's. I'd love to have you on that committee and let the Uri effect continue. I'm in favor of this. I'm in favor of the project as a whole is just it's a wonderful thing, but we're not here to just do oohs and ahs. We're here to be responsible. And so that's where I am. I appreciate the good work, Mayor, that you've done, Lynn and Cheryl, the confidence that I have in the two of you, and listening to your comments makes me feel more confident in the success and the future ability of this project to be successful. I think it's a great thing. And so Carl's over here, he keeps poking me. I'm going to go ahead and make a motion that we approve the phasing and project plan for Barker Park Amphitheater construction during the 2017-18 and 2018-19 budget years, contingent upon Jim Uri being admitted as a member of the committee in January. And I'm not kidding.
A lot of things to do.
I know you do.
With all due consideration to the details of all the other budget issues, we have got to keep our arms around.
Absolutely.
It's going to be a big job, and I hope we have another Jim Uri-like person that gets elected. We're going to need to.
Well, there is a write-in campaign.
The depreciation stuff.
If I were elected again, I'd be divorced. I've got 46 years in now. I don't want to be divorced. Paid my dues.
So did somebody second that?
Not yet.
I'm going to second it.
Okay, we have a motion and a second to appoint or accept
yeah.
this design and plan for the amphitheater. And I assume incumbent is, of course, we're going to bring back the future phases of funding. And then also ask Councilman Uri to serve on the committee once he would no longer be on the city council, which would, we can't have 3 council members on any committee, but in the future. So that'll be something for Councilman Uri to decide if that would work.
Between now and January to work it through with your wife.
Well, I told you last week, I hope this thing goes. So I would be available to help you, Mayor, in any way I can.
Thank you. Because the staff and I have discussed it many times that as we get ready for something, is this, what's Councilman Uri going to ask us about this?
I do hope it goes because I think it would be a good thing for the community. I just take that, I always take that tough stance, and what if? But I will, if this council passes it, I'll get behind you, Mayor, and help you in any way I can to help it and make sure it goes.
Thank you, because I think, honestly, that this amphitheater, once done, will have more people pass through it every year than any other facility besides the pool that we have in this city. Any park, any other public building, I think tens of thousands of people. Once it's up and fully running and has its full season, when you think on a 3-day show, we had 2,000 people. This will be, I think, a real gem of the community to get people together, get, out from the TV, get out, see each other, be at an event in a beautiful natural setting to celebrate the beauty of music, acting, our kids, our spouses that have that talent, like mine, who would love to. I don't. I'll never be at one of these events other than a spectator. But
Christmas Carol.
I think honestly, I think this will be a gem of the community. And I think we'll be happy to have something that's beautiful and makes us proud as a community too. I mean, yeah, most of our most beautiful buildings our, beautiful government buildings. Our,
Well, you can't go in any, well, I was gonna say, you can't go in any town in, that I know of any size, that the majority of the nice buildings aren't government sponsored, but you also cannot go in any town of any size and not find that the nicest buildings have the name of an insurance company or a bank on it.
or a bank. The tallest, for sure.
That tells you who's making a lot of money.
Okay, so we have a motion and a second to approve this design concept as described and bring back further in funding phases to the city council. Any further discussion? Start voting. Councilman Swanson?
Yes.
Councilman Turner?
Yes.
Councilwoman Stoker?
Yes.
Councilman Satterthwaite?
Yes.
And Councilman Uri?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. Then that passes, and we will start on the first phase and keep the council fully updated. I'll say thank you on behalf of the whole committee, and thank you for the trust you've given us to keep moving this project forward. I think we've had a great committee. I think Councilman Uri, when he's no longer councilman, would be a fantastic addition, as well as we really get into the more tight financial part, which will be figuring exactly what we can include in this first phase. That will kind of be a moving target as we go along. So thank you. We'll move now to item 11, which is public comments.
Oh, my goodness. Randy Quinn's here.
You know, I can't come to one of these meetings without saying something. Randy Wynn, 2412 Barker Parkway. I'm supporting Blake Severing for your replacement, but I have to say that I think the city is losing a couple of very wise heads, and I think the responsibility will be heavy on those that replace you. I'm frankly sorry to see you go. I had one thought. As this thing gets going, when you hire a full-time manager, there's 9 months of the year when they don't have anything, no income to offset there. And the thought came to my head that that maybe you could go in cooperation with the Layton facility and have that person schedule, with an agreement, a contract agreement to pay them something to have them schedule our facility, so that, because as you pointed out, the interests do coincide there, where they, and rather than having us setting up something and them setting up something and Sandy, at least we could have the two close ones work together. Might work, and then you can end up hiring a lot of summer help to fill in when the time comes. I do, my concern with the parking and the traffic, and I do remind the thing, I was at the meeting with Blake and the others as they stipulated that the parking be provided before occupancy, which John and I have discussed, and it's in the minutes. With that, I congratulate all the good work that's gone on to get this ready. This will be the city's biggest project, I think, and it's a lot of good planning. So hope it turns out well as well.
Thank you, Mr. Wynn. And have you seen the parking presentation we gave?
Yeah, I was just.
Were you here last week for?
I had another meeting. I had to be last week.
Okay.
I didn't. No.
I'd like to share that with you after the meeting. Or
Thank you.
give a
Appreciate it.
copy.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you. Let's do our closing comments. Annette, anything? Thank you, John. Nope. Okay. Let's start here tonight. Councilwoman Stoker.
Just a couple of questions. I wondered just how it's going with the officers with the new police chief, how that's working out, and also just was kind of curious about the library. It's been so long ago since we had a footprint of what they were doing. Did we actually gain any square footage?
So
Basically, it's just looking bigger.
it is doubling in usable square footage because they're finishing the basement that was just storage before. So that will be fully finished. And actually, it's a little more than doubled because they're building a new little piece out in the front that'll kind of be an entryway vestibule area that will be some new square footage. And then also there'll be some connection here to this new parking lot that might be a teeny addition as well. So there is some new utility, and they're looking next spring to be completed. April is the official date, but it may be done, we're hearing maybe a little sooner than that. And the new chief, the reports I'm getting have been very positive.
Thank you.
Councilman Satterthwaite.
I was going to ask about the police, but it's good.
Councilman Uri?
I just say that the only thing I have to say tonight is I don't always agree with you guys on this council, but I still like you. It's been a privilege to be able to work on the council with you because I think we discuss things very thoroughly, and when we make decisions and after the decisions make, if you don't agree with me, you're still my friends, and we'll move on and we'll see what we can get done.
Thank you. Councilman Swanson.
Well, Jim, I'm getting a Twitter account tomorrow. We'll see how long that lasts.
Is the mayor gonna start tweeting?
No, seems to be all the rage with some politicians, right? On 750 East, just below 3100, last house on the right, I can't remember the address off the top of my head. There's still a Ford panel wagon that sits right in the middle of the yard. It's been there for years. We either need to have that thing moved. I mean, it's an abandoned vehicle parked right in the middle of the yard. It's the front yard. It's not the side yard. And we either get that thing moved or we change our ordinance. It's silly that we have an ordinance that prohibits that kind of thing. It's been there forever. It's been brought up in this meeting numerous times. And either it's okay to park abandoned vehicles in your front yard or it isn't. And, it's been there long enough that the ground is kind of growing up around it, and it eventually will become one with the soil, but it'll be long after I'm gone.
Called camouflage.
It's one of those accessory dwelling units.
Yeah, it could be. My wife suggested that they just plant some flowers in the windshield or something like that and make it look like a decoration, and I guess that would be better than what it looks like now, but it's just a rusting piece of junk that's sitting there. And
Okay, I'm going to volunteer John for this task, so we've taken note of it.
So as that person's been addressed, their response has been, I put flowers in it, and it's no difference than an old farm implement. It's a lawn decoration.
but it's not a farm implement.
Right, but they're saying it's art.
Well, we have an ordinance now that allows us to do what we have to do, and I think it's time that we do what we have to do. I mean, because
What we call it, not what they call it.
well, yeah, you could call anything art, right?
That's right.
Okay,
And
John will kind of research and give us an opinion on what he thinks would be the legal
Just approach.
options or approaches.
okay,
Another good example of a similar situation is there's a property in the city where they grow a lot of different types of plants.
yes,
Some people might even call weeds, but they actually use them to make soaps and for herbal, medicinal, nothing illegal or anything like that as far as the type of things they're growing. But, and so we've just worked with them really close to say, okay, but you have to keep everything else around it clean. And that's kind of been the approach we've taken with that one. But I'll get some research on these type of issues and bring it back to the future council meeting.
thanks, John. And Jim, I'm grateful that you're willing to continue to help with that amphitheater in January.
If we're good enough.
Pasture up by Cheryl's house that's got a bunch of those vehicles in it too, and some sheep.
Really
Yeah.
good view of that from the switchbacks up high. It's
That's all I have.
than you think.
Thank you, Councilman Turner.
Nothing.
Okay, thank you, Councilman Swanson. Last night we had a great little ceremony at the Family Promise, the old Public Works building, and there, if you haven't seen it, it's really quite impressive what they did. I mean, they took that area, framed in bedrooms, and the whole kitchen and thing upstairs has all been redone. They had 7 Eagle Scouts who did projects as part of this, and they were all there last night and did the flag ceremony, those 7 scouts. So very neat. We had multiple congregations there last night. The Valley View Baptist Church and Pastor Dave was there, and they signed up to be one of the sponsoring congregations to host the families. So I think it's going to be a great thing for the city, and it's really looking nice and is very well done. They've been great to work with. It's not cost the city any money. We haven't, participated in the remodel. They've taken care of all the costs relative to that and have done everything they said that they would. So I've been very happy with them. So next month will be the first time it's used. Councilman Satterthwaite.
So my wife went down, and she said similar praise there. But I think she said there's only one bathroom in the.
There's 2. There's 2.
Is that true?
One is there's a shower bathroom too. So,
One upstairs, one downstairs.
I think so.
Can't make a comment. can I?
Yeah. Sure, Blake.
I was just gonna say, being on the board of trustees, there's 2.
Is there?
So it's,
Is there a
Gonna be
family in
nice.
there yet?
no,
Next month.
next month will be the first usage. So, can't remember which congregation it will be. I think maybe the one in Marriott Slaterville and an LDS war perhaps. But like I say, it'll be rotating through congregations. That's how they do the nightly sponsors, will be for 1 week at a time. One particular congregation will sponsor it. So should be really neat. Then I think that's everything I have. I'll send you some other stuff on email as well. So is there a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Second.
We have a motion to adjourn. All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay, thank you. We are adjourned.